Hey everyone, welcome back to another deep dive into the shadows. Tonight we're descending into Gotham City to uncover Batman's most haunting, unsolved mysteries. Not the flashy supervillain battles you see in the movies, but the cases that keep even the Dark Knight awake at 3 in the morning. The kind of investigations that dig so deep into human darkness that they change you forever. Before we begin this journey together, take a moment to hit that like button if you're ready for tonight's adventure into Gotham's darkest secrets. Don't forget to subscribe if you enjoy these explorations into the twisted corners of the DC universe. Drop a comment and let me know what part of the world you're listening from. I love seeing our global community come together for these stories. Now get comfortable. Maybe dim those lights, settle into your favorite spot. And let me tell you about 3 cases that changed Batman forever. Picture this scene. It's 3 a.m. in Gotham City, 1995. Rain hammers against the windows of Wayne Manor as Bruce Wayne stands before a wall in the deepest section of the Batcave. This isn't the main computer area where he tracks active cases. This is somewhere else entirely. Somewhere Alfred rarely ventures. The wall stretches 20 feet high, covered in photographs, newspaper clippings, medical records, and police files connected by red string in patterns that would make a conspiracy theorist weep. At the center of this madness are 3 file folders, each worn thin from handling, each bearing a single word stamped in faded red ink: unsolved. The first file contains the remnants of a case from the 1970s. Children who vanished from Gotham's East End, leaving behind only fragments of porcelain dolls. The second holds evidence of experiments conducted in Arkham Asylum during the 1980s, involving a man who insisted he was the real Mad Hatter, not the Jervis Tetch everyone knew. The third file is new, still growing thicker each week with fresh disappearances that follow the exact same pattern as the first. 3 decades, 3 seemingly unconnected cases, until tonight, when Batman finally discovered what links them all together. But here's what makes your blood run cold. As Bruce examines that wall, his fingers trace a connection he's never seen before. A name that appears in all 3 files. A name that shouldn't be there. A name that belongs to someone who was supposed to be helping Gotham's most vulnerable children. Not hunting them. The file slips from his trembling hands. And as the photographs scatter across the cave floor, one image stops his heart. It's a group photo from 1973 Gotham City Children's Hospital. Front row center stands a young doctor with kind eyes and a gentle smile, surrounded by dozens of children who trusted him completely. The nameplate beneath the photo reads, Dr. Thomas Wayne, Bruce's father. Tonight we're going to uncover how 3 generations of Gotham's darkest secrets converge into a truth so disturbing that it nearly broke Batman's mind. We'll explore the trinity of terror, 3 cases that reveal how evil doesn't just exist in the shadows of Crime Alley or the cells of Arkham Asylum. Sometimes it wears a white coat and speaks in gentle voices. Sometimes it hides behind philanthropy and good intentions. And sometimes it's been there all along, woven into the very foundation of everything you thought you could trust. This is a story about the price of truth, the weight of legacy, and what happens when Batman realizes that his war on crime might have been built on a lie from the very beginning. It's about the children who disappeared and the man who spent his life trying to save them, never knowing that the key to their fate was hidden in his own family's past. So let's begin our journey into the darkest corner of Gotham City, where we'll discover that some mysteries are buried not because they're unsolvable, but because the truth is too terrible for anyone to bear. The year is 1995, and Gotham City writhes under the grip of its most violent crime wave in decades. The Falcone family war has left bodies in the harbor. The Joker's latest escape from Arkham has the city on edge, and Commissioner Gordon's police force is stretched so thin they're barely keeping the peace. But tonight, none of that matters to Bruce Wayne. Deep beneath Wayne Manor, in the limestone caverns that house the Batcave, Batman has retreated from the chaos above. The main computer screens that usually track active cases have been dimmed. The Batmobile sits silent in its dock. Even the bats that give this place its name seem to sense the gravity of what their human inhabitant is attempting. For 3 months, Bruce has been working in secret on something that goes beyond his nightly patrol. In a secluded alcove of the cave, far from the main operational area, he's constructed what Alfred has quietly dubbed the Memorial Wall. It's a shrine to Gotham's forgotten victims, the cases that fell through the cracks, the children who vanished without headlines or manhunts. The wall itself tells a story of obsession. 20 feet of limestone covered in documentation that spans 30 years of Gotham's history. Police reports yellow with age share space with medical records, missing person flyers, and dozens of photographs of children who smiled once for school pictures and were never seen again. Red string connects seemingly random points across decades, creating a web of connections that only Batman's trained eye can decipher. At 42, Bruce Wayne has been Batman for over a decade, but tonight he looks older. The weight of unsolved mysteries has carved new lines around his eyes. His hands, steady enough to disable a bomb or scale a skyscraper, tremble slightly as they trace patterns on the wall. This isn't the controlled investigation of a typical case. This is archaeology of trauma, excavating pain that Gotham buried and tried to forget. The cave's perpetual chill seems deeper here, as if the very air knows it's witnessing something sacred and terrible. Stalactites drip steadily into the darkness below, each drop echoing like a countdown. The only other sound is the whisper of Bruce's cape as he moves between sections of the wall, reviewing evidence he's memorized but needs to see again. Alfred Pennyworth descends the stone steps with practiced silence, carrying a silver tray bearing Earl Grey tea and sandwiches that will go untouched. At 78, the Wayne family butler has seen Bruce through every phase of his transformation, from traumatized child to legendary vigilante. But he's never seen his surrogate son like this, consumed by a mystery that seems to be consuming him in return. "Master Bruce," Alfred says gently, setting the tray on a nearby table carved from living rock. "You've been down here for 16 hours. Perhaps some rest would provide fresh perspective." Bruce doesn't turn around. His attention remains fixed on 3 file folders at the center of the wall, each thick with documentation and marked with evidence tags from different decades. "Tell me about the Wayne Foundation's involvement with Gotham's orphanages in the 1970s, Alfred." The question hangs in the cold air like a challenge. Alfred has served the Wayne family for over 50 years. He was Thomas Wayne's confidant long before he became Bruce's guardian. There are secrets in Wayne Manor older than Batman himself, and Alfred is their keeper. "Your father believed deeply in helping disadvantaged children," Alfred responds carefully. "The Foundation funded numerous programs throughout the city." "I'm not asking about the programs everyone knows about." Bruce finally turns, and Alfred sees something in those grey eyes that makes him step back involuntarily. "I'm asking about the ones they tried to hide." The memorial wall looms behind Bruce like an accusation. In its center, 3 case files wait like patient predators. The first, labeled Dollmaker Murders 1973-1979, contains photographs of crime scenes that would haunt seasoned detectives. The second, Mad Hatter, Incidents 1982-1987, holds testimonies of children who spoke of tea parties in underground rooms before they stopped speaking at all. The third file is newer, its edges still sharp, labeled simply Current Pattern, 1993 Present. What Alfred doesn't know, what no one knows except Bruce, is that these 3 cases share more than similar methods or victim profiles. They share a common thread that runs through Gotham's most respected institutions, through families that have shaped the city for generations. and through the very foundation of everything Bruce Wayne thought he knew about his legacy. Outside, Gotham's night continues its eternal dance of sirens and shadows. Somewhere in the city, Commissioner Gordon stares at missing person reports that echo patterns from decades past. In her clock tower, Oracle processes data streams looking for connections the police can't see. But here in the depths of the Batcave, Batman has already found the connection they're all searching for. It's a connection that leads directly to a name he never expected to find in the darkness. A name that represents everything he's tried to honor through his war on crime. A name that, when he speaks it aloud, will change everything he believes about justice, family, and the true cost of protecting Gotham's children. The investigation that began as a quest to solve 3 cold cases has become something far more dangerous. It's become an excavation of the Wayne family's deepest secrets. And what Bruce is about to uncover will either destroy him or transform him into something even Gotham's criminals have never faced before. Bruce Wayne stands motionless before the memorial wall, his cape pooling around him like spilled ink. The silence stretches between him and Alfred until it becomes a living thing, heavy with unspoken truths and questions neither man wants to voice. Finally, Bruce reaches for the first file folder, the one labeled Dollmaker Murders, 1973-1979. I need to know everything, Alfred. Not the sanitized version from the Foundation's annual reports. Not the story they told the newspapers. Everything. Alfred's weathered hands clasped behind his back, a gesture Bruce recognizes as his butler's way of preparing for difficult conversations. Master Bruce, some stones are better left unturned. Your father was a good man who... My father's medical bag was found at 3 of the crime scenes. Bruce's voice cuts through Alfred's protest like a blade through silk. His initials are carved into the handle of surgical instruments recovered from locations where children disappeared. I've spent 3 months verifying the evidence, Alfred. The connections are real. The admission hangs between them like a confession. Alfred's composed expression finally cracks, revealing something raw and painful beneath. For a moment, he looks every one of his 78 years. Your father was investigating those disappearances, Alfred says quietly. Dr. Thomas Wayne believed someone was using his medical equipment, his credentials, to gain access to vulnerable children. He was getting close to the truth when he and your mother were killed. Bruce turns back to the wall, his trained eyes scanning photographs that have haunted Gotham's collective memory for decades. Crime Alley, Park Row, the Bowery, all locations where children vanished between 1973 and 1979, leaving behind only fragments of porcelain dolls and the lingering scent of antiseptic. The official investigation concluded that Dr. Barton Mathis, the original dollmaker, acted alone, Bruce continues, pulling out a yellowed police report. But Mathis died in Arkham Asylum in 1978, a full year before the last disappearance. Someone continued his work, Alfred. Someone with medical knowledge. Someone who understood exactly how Mathis operated. The Batcave seems to contract around them as Bruce speaks, the weight of 30-year-old secrets pressing down like tons of limestone. He moves to a section of the wall where newspaper clippings from the Gotham Gazette tell the sanitized version of events. Dollmaker killer dies in asylum. Children's Hospital increases security. Wayne Foundation pledges funds for child protection. But beneath these public headlines, Bruce has uncovered a darker narrative. Medical records show that Dr. Thomas Wayne had been working late at Gotham Children's Hospital during the time period when several children disappeared. His signature appears on intake forms for vulnerable patients, children from broken homes who wouldn't be immediately missed. His hospital ID card was used to access restricted areas during unusual hours. The night my parents were killed, Bruce says, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. They were returning from a meeting with Commissioner Loeb about the Dollmaker case. My father had evidence. He was going to expose whoever was continuing Mathis's work. Alfred moves closer to the wall, his eyes focusing on a photograph Bruce has positioned at the center of the display. It shows a group of children from St. Swithin's Home for Wayward Youth. Taken in 1974, 5 children smile at the camera, their faces bright with the kind of hope that only children can maintain in the darkest circumstances. Below the photograph, a handwritten note in Thomas Wayne's distinctive script reads, "These children trust us. We cannot fail them." All 5 children in that photograph disappeared within 6 months of when it was taken. Your father spent the last months of his life consumed by guilt, Alfred admits, his voice heavy with decades of carried secrets. He believed someone was using his identity, his access, to harm the very children he'd dedicated his career to protecting. He couldn't prove it, but he knew. The knowledge was destroying him. Bruce pulls out a manila envelope from the first file folder, one he's opened countless times over the past 3 months. Inside are photocopies of pages from Thomas Wayne's personal journal, pages Alfred has never seen before. The handwriting grows increasingly erratic as the entries progress, documenting a man's descent into paranoia and desperation. January 15th, 1979, another child gone from St. Swithin's, Mary Catherine O'Brien, age 7. The intake nurse swears I signed her release forms, but I have no memory of seeing this child. Someone is using my credentials. Someone who knows my routines, my handwriting, my medical procedures. March 3rd, 1979. Found my medical bag in the storage room at Children's Hospital. Hadn't used it in weeks, but the instruments inside were recently sterilized. Traces of sedative on the syringes. God help me, what if I'm losing my mind? What if I am doing these things and can't remember? June 18th, 1979. The truth is worse than I imagined. I know who's been using my identity. I know why the children trust their abductor enough to go willingly. Tomorrow I meet with Commissioner Loeb. Tomorrow this nightmare ends. Thomas Wayne never made it to that meeting. He and his wife Martha were gunned down in Crime Alley less than 12 hours after writing that final entry. Bruce closes the journal, pages, and looks at Alfred with eyes that have seen too much. Darkness, but refuse to look away. Someone killed my parents to protect this secret. Someone who knew exactly when and where they would be that night. Someone who wanted Thomas Wayne silenced before he could expose the truth about the Dollmaker murders. The implications of this revelation ripple through the Batcave like shockwaves. Everything Bruce has believed about his origin story, his motivation for becoming Batman, suddenly takes on new dimensions. His parents weren't just victims of random street crime. They were targeted because Thomas Wayne had gotten too close to a truth that powerful people needed buried. Alfred walks to the Batcave's main computer terminal and begins typing with practiced efficiency. If you're determined to pursue this investigation, Master Bruce, then we need to examine all the evidence systematically. No assumptions, no emotional reactions, just facts. The computer screens flicker to life, displaying databases that most law enforcement agencies don't even know exist. Alfred's fingers dance across the keyboard with surprising speed, calling up archived police reports, medical records, and financial transactions from the 1970s. The Wayne Foundation funded 17 different programs for at-risk children between 1993 and 1979, Alfred says, as data streams across multiple monitors. Your father personally oversaw the medical evaluations for children entering protective services. He had access to detailed psychological profiles, family histories, and placement records for hundreds of vulnerable children. Bruce studies the data with the focused intensity that has made him Gotham's greatest detective. Patterns emerge from the chaos of information, connections that investigators 30 years ago either missed or chose to ignore. The children who disappeared weren't selected randomly. They were chosen specifically because they fit a particular psychological profile. Children whose disappearances wouldn't trigger extensive searches or media attention. Look at this, Bruce says, pointing to a series of financial records displayed on one of the screens. Large cash withdrawals from Thomas Wayne's personal account, always within 48 hours of a child's disappearance. The amounts match exactly with payments made to private investigation firms. Alfred leans forward, squinting at the financial data. Your father was paying private detectives to search for the missing children when the police investigation stalled. He was conducting his own parallel investigation. The pieces of a 30-year-old puzzle begin falling into place. Thomas Wayne wasn't complicit in the disappearances. He was desperately trying to solve them, using his own resources when official channels failed. But someone was watching his investigation. Someone who understood that Thomas Wayne was getting dangerously close to the truth. Bruce opens the second file folder, the one labeled Mad Hatter, Incidents 1982-1987. Inside are police reports and witness testimonies that paint a disturbing picture of events that occurred just 3 years after his parents' murder. Children from the same demographics as the dollmaker victims began disappearing again, but this time the crime scenes contained different calling cards, playing cards with the Queen of Hearts, teacups and saucers arranged in precise patterns, and always the lingering smell of Earl Grey tea. The Mad Hatter case was never properly solved either, Bruce says, spreading photographs across the cave floor. Jervis Tetch claimed responsibility, but his alibis for half the disappearances were solid. He was in Arkham during several of the incidents. Alfred studies the photographs with growing unease. You believe the same person responsible for continuing the dollmaker's work also orchestrated the Mad Hatter incidents. I believe we're looking at someone who has been operating in Gotham for over 20 years, someone who understands how to manipulate the system, how to use other people's identities and obsessions as camouflage, someone who has been hunting Gotham's children for decades while hiding behind respectable facades. The third file folder sits unopened on the cave floor, but its presence looms over their conversation like a storm cloud. Bruce knows that inside that folder are photographs and reports documenting disappearances that have occurred within the past 2 years. Children who have vanished using the exact same methods as the victims from the 1970s and 1980s. The pattern hasn't stopped. It's simply been dormant, waiting for the right moment to resurface. And now, in 1995, with Bruce Wayne finally asking the right questions about his parents' murder, the disappearances have begun again. The third file folder feels heavier than it should when Bruce finally opens it. Inside are police reports so fresh the ink hasn't completely dried, missing person flyers with photographs of children whose families still believe they might come home, and crime scene photos that confirm Bruce's worst fears. The pattern has returned with surgical precision. Timothy Chen, age 8, disappeared from Robinson Park Playground on March 15, 1995, Bruce reads from the most recent report. Last seen talking to a man in a white coat who claimed to be a doctor. Witnesses described the man as middle-aged, professional appearance, carrying a medical bag with the initials TW. Alfred's sharp intake of breath echoes through the cave. Someone is still using your father's identity. Bruce spreads the contents of the current case file across the limestone floor, creating a macabre timeline of recent events. 7 children have disappeared in Gotham over the past 18 months, all following the same pattern that marked the dollmaker murders 20 years ago. But this time, the perpetrator has made a crucial mistake. This time, there are witnesses. Sarah Martinez, age 6, vanished from Mercy General Hospital while receiving treatment for a broken arm. Bruce continues reading. Security footage shows her leaving with a man wearing a doctor's coat and surgical mask. The man used Thomas Wayne's old hospital ID to access the pediatric ward. The security footage plays on one of the Batcave's monitors, grainy black and white images that reveal more questions than answers. The figure in the doctor's coat moves with practiced confidence through the hospital corridors, someone familiar enough with the layout to avoid most security cameras. His height and build match descriptions from witnesses to the original dollmaker murders, but that should be impossible. If the same person committed crimes in 1973 and 1995, he would have to be at least 70 years old. Alfred moves to the computer terminal and begins cross-referencing the new disappearances with the historical cases. The geographical pattern is identical, he observes, highlighting locations on a digital map of Gotham. Crime Alley, the Bowery, areas where your father worked with disadvantaged children. Someone with intimate knowledge of his routines and territories. Bruce studies the map with growing unease. The locations aren't random. They're carefully chosen sites that hold special significance in Thomas Wayne's medical career. The free clinic, where he treated homeless children. The orphanage, where he served on the board of directors. The community center, where he volunteered during holiday seasons. Whoever is doing this wants the crimes connected to my father's memory, Bruce realizes. The medical bag, the hospital ID, even the locations. It's not just about continuing the dollmaker's work. It's about destroying Thomas Wayne's legacy. The revelation hits him like a physical blow. Someone has spent decades crafting an elaborate campaign of revenge against a dead man, using Gotham's most vulnerable children as weapons in a war against the Wayne family's reputation. But why target Thomas Wayne specifically? What could a pediatrician have done to inspire such methodical, long-term vengeance? Bruce walks to a section of the memorial wall where he's assembled everything he could find about his father's final months. Hospital schedules, patient files, financial records, and personal correspondence paint a picture of a man under enormous psychological pressure. Thomas Wayne's final year was marked by increasing paranoia, sleepless nights spent reviewing old cases, and a growing conviction that someone was systematically destroying everything he'd worked to build. "Look at this patient file," Bruce says, holding up a folder marked with his father's handwriting. Rebecca Morrison, age 9, treated at Children's Hospital in January 1979. Severe malnutrition and signs of prolonged psychological trauma. My father noted that she spoke repeatedly about the kind doctor who gave tea parties in the basement. Alfred examines the file with professional interest. Mad Hatter methodology, 5 years before the official Mad Hatter cases began. This suggests our perpetrator was already developing his tea party obsession while still using dollmaker techniques. The patient file contains detailed notes in Thomas Wayne's handwriting, observations about Rebecca Morrison's psychological state that reveal a trained physician's growing horror at what he was uncovering. The child spoke of underground rooms decorated like dollhouses, of other children who attended the tea parties but never returned home, of a man who wore different masks and spoke in different voices but always smelled like antiseptic and Earl Grey tea. Rebecca Morrison died 3 days after giving this testimony. Bruce reads from the bottom of the file. Cardiac arrest brought on by a severe allergic reaction to medication she'd never been prescribed. The attending physician signed off on the death certificate without ordering an autopsy. Alfred's fingers tighten on the file folder. The attending physician's signature, Dr. Hugo Strange. Bruce's voice carries the weight of terrible understanding. The same Dr. Strange who would later become one of Arkham's most notorious psychiatrists. The same man who would spend decades studying Batman's psychology and claiming to understand the criminal mind better than anyone else in Gotham. The connection sends shockwaves through everything. Bruce thought he knew about his enemies. Dr. Hugo Strange wasn't just another Arkham psychiatrist with an unhealthy interest in Batman's identity. He was the common thread connecting 30 years of child disappearances. The puppet master who had been orchestrating elaborate psychological games using other people's obsessions as camouflage. Bruce moves to the computer terminal and begins pulling up everything he can find about Hugo Strange's early career in Gotham. Medical school records, hospital employment history, research publications and personal correspondence reveal a brilliant but deeply disturbed individual whose fascination with human psychology crossed ethical boundaries from the very beginning. Strange graduated from Gotham University Medical School in 1971. Bruce reads from the biographical data. Specialization in pediatric psychology and pharmaceutical research. First employment at Gotham Children's Hospital under the supervision of Dr. Thomas Wayne. The pieces click into place with horrible clarity. Hugo Strange wasn't just Thomas Wayne's colleague. He was his protégé, his student, someone who had intimate access to Wayne's methods, his patient files, his personal and professional routines. Someone who could easily forge Wayne's signature, duplicate his mannerisms, and use his reputation to gain children's trust. Strange was conducting unauthorized psychological experiments on children as early as 1972, Alfred observes, reading from a series of hospital incident reports. Your father filed several complaints about Strange's methods, describing them as unnecessarily invasive and potentially harmful to young minds. Bruce finds Thomas Wayne's final performance evaluation of Hugo Strange, written just 3 months before the Wayne murders. The document reads like an indictment of everything Strange. Represented as a physician and researcher, Dr. Strange demonstrates concerning disregard for patient welfare in favor of advancing his theoretical research, Thomas Wayne had written. His methodology shows a disturbing pattern of psychological manipulation designed to increase patient dependency and compliance. I cannot in good conscience recommend him for permanent placement in our pediatric psychology program. That performance evaluation effectively ended Hugo Strange's legitimate medical career at Gotham Children's Hospital. Within 6 months, Strange had been quietly transferred to a research position at Arkham Asylum, where his controversial methods would be less likely to attract outside scrutiny. My father destroyed Strange's career, Bruce realizes. Strange spent the next 25 years getting revenge. The memorial wall suddenly takes on new meaning. It's not just a collection of cold cases. It's a catalogue of Hugo Strange's systematic campaign against the Wayne family legacy, a decades-long psychological war fought using Gotham's most innocent victims as casualties. Bruce opens the final section of the current case files, the ones documenting disappearances that have occurred within the past month. The pattern has accelerated dramatically, with 3 children vanishing in the past 2 weeks alone. But now Bruce understands why. Strange knows that Batman is finally asking the right questions about the Wayne murders. He knows his secret is about to be exposed. The current disappearances aren't random, Bruce says, studying the most recent crime scene photographs. Strange is eliminating witnesses, children who might have survived his earlier experiments, adults who might remember seeing him during the original doll-maker murders. He's cleaning up loose ends before disappearing forever. Alfred examines a photograph showing porcelain doll fragments arranged around a child's bicycle in Robinson Park. Or perhaps he's preparing for one final game, something that will cement his victory over the Wayne family permanently. The thought sends a chill through Bruce that has nothing to do with the Batcave's perpetual coolness. Hugo Strange has spent 25 years studying Batman's psychology, learning every detail of his methods and motivations. If Strange is preparing for a final confrontation, he'll use that knowledge to construct the ultimate psychological trap. Bruce looks again at the memorial wall, seeing it now not as a shrine to forgotten victims, but as a roadmap to Hugo Strange's twisted mind. Every disappearance, every carefully planted clue, every moment of psychological torment has been building toward this moment. Strange doesn't just want to defeat Batman, he wants to destroy Bruce Wayne's faith in everything his father represented. The hunt for Hugo Strange is about to begin, but Bruce realizes he's not the hunter in this scenario. He's been the prey, all along carefully guided toward this moment by a predator who has been watching him for decades. The real question isn't whether he can find Hugo Strange. The question is whether he can survive what Strange has planned for him. Commissioner James Gordon stands in the harsh fluorescent lighting of Gotham Central's evidence room, surrounded by boxes that haven't been opened in over a decade. His weathered hands shake slightly as he lifts the lid on a container marked Doll Maker, Investigation 1973 and 1979, case closed. The smell of old paper and forgotten secrets fills the cramped space. I should have known you'd eventually come asking. About this, Gordon says to Batman, who emerged from the shadows between the evidence lockers like he was born from them. 20 years I've been waiting for someone to ask the right questions about those cases. Batman moves closer to the evidence boxes, his trained eyes scanning labels and case numbers with systematic precision. The official reports concluded that Dr. Barton Mathis, the original dollmaker, was responsible for all disappearances between 1973 and 1979, but Mathis died in Arkham a full year before the pattern stopped. Gordon pulls out a thick manila folder, its edges worn soft from handling. That's the story we told the public. Had to. The real story would have destroyed too many lives, shattered too much faith in institutions people needed to trust. The folder contains photographs and documents that never made it into the official case files. Crime scene images showing evidence that was quietly removed before investigators arrived. Witness statements that were taken but never officially recorded. Financial records proving that certain evidence was purchased from crime scenes before police could catalogue it. We knew someone was continuing Mathis's work, Gordon admits, his voice heavy with decades of carried guilt. The methodology was too consistent, too precise. Mathis was a butcher who worked from rage and madness. His imitator was surgical, methodical, someone with medical training and unlimited patience. Batman examines a photograph showing surgical instruments arranged around a child's abandoned shoe in Crime Alley. The instruments are pristine, recently sterilized, laid out with the precision of an operating room rather than the chaotic scatter-typical of most crime scenes. These instruments belong to my father, Batman says, recognizing the distinctive grip pattern on the scalpel handles. Someone was using Thomas Wayne's medical equipment to continue the dollmaker murders. Gordon's expression confirms Batman's darkest suspicions. Your father came to me 6 months before he was killed. He'd figured out that someone was using his identity, his credentials, his equipment to gain access to vulnerable children. We were working together to build a case. The admission hangs between them like a bridge spanning 20 years of secrets. Gordon opens another section of the evidence folder, revealing surveillance photographs taken outside Gotham Children's Hospital in early 1979. The images show a figure in a white coat and surgical mask entering and leaving the building at unusual hours, always carrying a medical bag with Thomas Wayne's initials. We had him under surveillance for 2 months, Gordon continues, but he was careful, never showed his face clearly, never followed a predictable schedule. And then your parents were killed, and the disappearances stopped completely. Case closed, officially speaking. Batman studies the surveillance photos with growing frustration. The figure in the white coat could be anyone of average height and build. The surgical mask and hospital cap effectively hide every identifying feature. Even Thomas Wayne himself couldn't be ruled out based on these images alone. You suspected my father, Batman realizes. Gordon's silence is confirmation enough. For 20 years, Gotham's police commissioner has carried the burden of wondering whether Dr. Thomas Wayne, the city's most respected pediatrician, might have been its most prolific child killer. The evidence pointed in that direction. The timing of his death coinciding with the end of the disappearances seemed like more than coincidence. The night your parents were killed, they were supposed to meet me at police headquarters, Gordon finally says. Your father claimed he had evidence that would identify the real dollmaker, evidence that would clear his name and expose the truth. He never made it to that meeting. Batman processes this information with the methodical approach that has made him Gotham's greatest detective. Thomas Wayne wasn't fleeing justice when he was killed. He was pursuing it. Someone orchestrated the Wayne murders specifically to prevent Thomas from exposing the truth about the dollmaker case. Who else knew about the meeting? Batman asks. Gordon's expression darkens. That's the question that's haunted me for 20 years. The meeting was arranged through official channels. Anyone with access to police communication logs could have known about it. But more troubling is how the killer knew exactly when and where your parents would be that night. The implication is chilling. Someone inside Gotham's law enforcement or medical community had advanced knowledge of Thomas Wayne's investigation and his planned meeting with Commissioner Gordon. Someone positioned to monitor police communications and predict the Wayne family's movements on that fateful night in Crime Alley. Batman examines the final section of Gordon's hidden evidence folder, documents that paint a disturbing picture of institutional cover-up and misdirection. Financial records show payments made to private security firms for evidence suppression. Medical records prove that several surviving victims of the dollmaker were quietly transferred to psychiatric facilities outside Gotham, where their testimonies could be dismissed as delusional rambling. The Wayne Foundation paid for most of these cover-up operations, Batman realizes, reading through accounting documents that bear his father's signature. Thomas Wayne was funding the suppression of evidence in his own case. Gordon shakes his head slowly. Your father was trying to protect other people's children from publicity that would have destroyed their chance at normal lives. The kids who survived what the dollmaker did to them, they needed therapy and privacy, not newspaper headlines and courtroom testimony. The explanation makes sense from a humanitarian perspective, but it also demonstrates how easily well-intentioned actions can be manipulated by someone with darker purposes. Thomas Wayne's desire to protect traumatized children provided perfect cover for someone who wanted certain evidence to disappear permanently. Batman closes the evidence folder and looks at Gordon with renewed respect. For 20 years, the Commissioner has carried the burden of an unsolved case that implicated Gotham's most beloved family. He's maintained public faith in the Wayne legacy while privately harboring doubts about Thomas Wayne's innocence. The case isn't closed, is it? Batman asks. The disappearances started again 18 months ago, Gordon confirms. Same methodology, same victim profile, same surgical precision. Whoever killed those children in the 1970s is back, and he's using your father's identity again. Batman feels a familiar surge of determination, the focused rage that has driven him through a decade of crime fighting. But this time it's personal in ways that go beyond his parents' murder. Someone has spent 25 years destroying Thomas Wayne's reputation while using his identity to harm the children he'd dedicated his life to protecting. I need everything you have on the current cases, Batman says. Gordon hands him a thick file folder, this one filled with recent police reports and crime scene photos. 7 children, 18 months. The pattern is accelerating, like he's building towards something bigger. Something that will make the original dollmaker murders look like a warm-up. Batman examines photographs from the most recent disappearance. A 6-year-old girl named Maria Santos who vanished from St. Swithin's home for wayward youth, the same orphanage where several of the original dollmaker victims had lived, the same institution where Thomas Wayne had served on the board of directors until his death. He's not just continuing the original crimes, Batman realizes. He's recreating them exactly, using the same locations, the same methods, even the same institutions. This isn't about killing children. It's about destroying my father's legacy systematically and permanently. Gordon nods grimly. And when he's finished with that, he'll come for you. Whatever drove this man to spend 25 years planning revenge against your father, it won't be satisfied until every Wayne is destroyed. The evidence room suddenly feels smaller, more claustrophobic, as if the weight of 25 years of secrets is pressing down on them. Batman realizes that the memorial wall in the Batcave is more than a collection of cold cases. It's a roadmap to his own destruction, carefully constructed by someone who understands that the most effective way to defeat Batman is to destroy Bruce Wayne's faith in everything his father represented. The hunt for the truth about Thomas Wayne's legacy has become a race against time. Somewhere in Gotham, children are disappearing into a nightmare that began before Batman existed, and the man responsible has spent decades preparing for the moment when Bruce Wayne would finally ask the right questions about his parents' murder. Batman hands the evidence folder back to Gordon, but keeps several photographs for his own investigation. If someone contacts you claiming to have information about the Dollmaker case, don't meet with them alone. This man has been planning his endgame for 25 years. He won't hesitate to eliminate anyone who threatens to expose him. As Batman disappears back into the shadows between the evidence lockers, Gordon is left alone with boxes of secrets that have defined his career. The official story of the Dollmaker murders provided closure for a traumatized city, but it left the real killer free to continue his work in silence. The false conclusion that ended the original investigation wasn't just a mistake. It was a carefully orchestrated misdirection designed to protect someone whose crimes were far worse than anything Barton Mathis had ever imagined. That she abandoned Ace Chemical plant stands like a monument to Gotham's industrial decay, its broken windows reflecting the pale moonlight that filters through the perpetual haze hanging over the East End. Batman moves through the facility's darkened corridors with practiced silence, following a trail of evidence that has led him deeper into Gotham's forgotten places than he's ever ventured before. 3 weeks have passed since his conversation with Commissioner Gordon in the evidence room. 3 weeks of methodical investigation that has revealed connections spanning decades of Gotham's hidden history. The memorial wall in the Batcave has grown exponentially, now covering 3 sections of limestone with documents, photographs, and evidence that paint a disturbing picture of institutional corruption and systematic child endangerment. The chemical plant wasn't chosen randomly for tonight's exploration. Financial records recovered from Wayne. Foundation archives show that Thomas Wayne personally funded the facility's conversion into a temporary medical clinic during the harsh winter of 1978. For 6 months, the abandoned industrial space served as an emergency treatment center for homeless children and families who couldn't access traditional medical care. Batman's flashlight illuminates makeshift examination rooms that were constructed in what used to be chemical storage areas. Hospital beds salvaged from Gotham General still line the walls, their metal frames rusted but intact. Medical equipment covered in decades of dust tells the story of a humanitarian effort that ended abruptly when Thomas Wayne was murdered. But the plant holds secrets that go beyond its brief medical purpose. In the facility's basement levels, Batman has discovered evidence of activities that occurred long after the official clinic was closed. Surgical instruments hidden in chemical storage tanks, children's clothing buried beneath piles of industrial waste, and most disturbing of all, a series of underground rooms that were modified with soundproofing and specialized ventilation systems. The basement rooms reveal the true scope of what has been happening in Gotham for the past 25 years. Each chamber is designed like a medical facility, complete with examination tables, surgical lighting, and pharmaceutical storage areas. But the restraints built into the furniture and the observation windows installed in the walls suggest purposes that have nothing to do with legitimate medical treatment. Batman examines one room that has been preserved exactly as it was left after its last use. Child-sized restraints are still attached to an examination table. Vials of unidentified chemicals line shelves built into the concrete walls, and covering every surface are photographs of children, hundreds of them, documenting what can only be described as systematic psychological experimentation. The photographs reveal the progression of Dr. Hugo Strange's research over decades of illegal human experimentation. Early images from the 1970s show children in clinical settings being subjected to psychological tests and pharmaceutical trials. Later photographs from the 1980s document more invasive procedures, surgical modifications designed to enhance or diminish specific psychological responses. The most recent photographs, dated within the past year, show children in elaborate staged environments. Some are dressed as characters from Alice in Wonderland, sitting at tea tables while electrodes monitor their brain activity. Others are positioned in dollhouse-like settings, their faces reflecting the vacant expressions of severe psychological trauma. Batman's investigation has revealed that the Ace chemical plant served as Hugo Strange's primary research facility after his expulsion from legitimate medical institutions. Hidden from public view and protected by layers of industrial camouflage, the facility allowed Strange to conduct experiments that would have been impossible in traditional medical settings. But the plant is more than just a laboratory. It's a monument to Strange's obsession with the Wayne family and his determination to destroy everything Thomas Wayne represented. One room is entirely devoted to Thomas Wayne memorabilia. Medical journals authored by Wayne cover the walls. Photographs of Wayne with his patients are arranged in shrine-like displays, and dominating the center of the room is a life-sized medical mannequin dressed in Thomas Wayne's actual hospital coat, stolen from Gotham Children's Hospital shortly after his death. The mannequin serves as the centerpiece for what can only be described as a grotesque medical theater. Strange has been using the figure to practice medical procedures while role-playing as Thomas Wayne. Surgical instruments are arranged around the mannequin exactly as they would be in an operating room, and according to handwritten notes found nearby, Strange has been conducting imaginary conversations with the mannequin for over 20 years. The conversations, documented in Strange's meticulous handwriting, reveal a mind consumed by professional jealousy and personal inadequacy. Strange blames Thomas Wayne for the destruction of his medical career, but more than that, he envies Wayne's natural ability to connect with children and inspire their trust. The experimental procedures conducted in the basement were Strange's attempt to understand and replicate Wayne's psychological techniques. Batman discovers treatment records showing that Strange has been abducting children who matched the psychological profiles of Thomas Wayne's most successful patient interactions. He studies their responses to various stimuli, documents their trust-building behaviors, and attempts to reverse engineer the qualities that made Wayne such an effective pediatrician. The research has produced devastating results for the children involved. Medical charts document severe psychological trauma resulting from prolonged experimentation. Many subjects developed complete dissociative disorders, losing the ability to form normal human relationships. Others experienced pharmaceutical-induced brain damage that left them permanently dependent on institutional care. But Strange's research wasn't entirely unsuccessful. He discovered that children who had been treated by Thomas Wayne retained specific psychological markers that could be identified and exploited. These markers, essentially trust responses conditioned by positive medical experiences, made the children ideal subjects for manipulation by someone presenting himself as a medical authority figure. This discovery led Strange to develop his most elaborate deception. By impersonating Thomas Wayne and using stolen medical credentials, Strange could gain immediate trust from children who had been conditioned to associate medical professionals with safety and care. The children would follow him willingly, believing they were being helped by someone like the kind doctor who had treated them before. Batman examines a section of the basement devoted to Strange's most recent experiments. Unlike the clinical sterility of the other rooms, this area has been decorated to resemble various storybook environments. A tea party setting complete with oversized furniture and playing card decorations. A dollhouse environment with child-sized furniture and porcelain doll collections. And most disturbing of all, a replica of the Wayne family study, complete with Thomas Wayne's actual books and personal effects. The storybook environments represent Strange's evolution from medical researcher to psychological predator. He discovered that children subjected to trauma could be more easily controlled if the traumatic experiences were presented within familiar fantasy frameworks. The Mad Hatter persona wasn't just a disguise. It was a sophisticated psychological tool designed to make children compliant during horrific experiences. The dollhouse environment reveals even darker purposes. Strange documented his attempts to psychologically condition children to become living dolls, completely obedient and emotionally dependent on their captor. The experiments involved pharmaceutical modification of brain chemistry, combined with behavioral conditioning techniques that essentially rewrote the children's personalities. But the replica Wayne family study represents Strange's ultimate goal. He has been using this environment to role-play elaborate scenarios in which he confronts Thomas Wayne about their professional rivalry. Medical journals found in the room document imaginary conversations in which Strange finally achieves the recognition and respect he believes Wayne denied him during their time working together. Batman realizes that Strange's decades of experimentation have been building toward a single ultimate goal. He doesn't just want to destroy the Wayne family's reputation. He wants to psychologically become Thomas Wayne, taking possession of Wayne's identity, his relationships, and his legacy. The children who have disappeared aren't just research subjects. They're props in an elaborate psychological theater designed to fulfill Strange's delusional fantasies. The basement also contains evidence of Strange's extensive surveillance of the Wayne family over the past 25 years. Photographs document Bruce Wayne's transformation from traumatized child to adult vigilante. Detailed psychological profiles analyze Batman's methods and motivations with clinical precision. And most disturbing of all, treatment plans outline how Strange intends to apply his experimental techniques to Batman himself. Strange has been studying Batman not just as an enemy to be defeated, but as a patient to be treated. The psychological profile describes Batman as suffering from severe childhood trauma that has created an obsessive-compulsive disorder focused on crime prevention. Strange believes he can cure Batman by forcing him to confront the false assumptions underlying his vigilante activities. The cure involves destroying Batman's faith in his father's innocence through carefully orchestrated revelations about Thomas Wayne's supposed involvement in child endangerment. Strange has spent decades planting evidence and manipulating witnesses to create a compelling case against Thomas Wayne. When Batman finally uncovers this fabricated evidence, the psychological shock will supposedly break his obsessive need to protect others. But Strange's plan goes beyond simple psychological manipulation. The treatment plans describe pharmaceutical interventions designed to chemically alter Batman's brain chemistry. Experimental drugs developed through decades of research on abducted children will be used to suppress Batman's aggressive impulses and replace them with complete dependency on Strange as a father figure. Batman examines the final section of Strange's basement laboratory, an area devoted to preparing for what Strange calls the final treatment session. Restraint systems designed specifically for adult subjects, pharmaceutical preparations calculated for Batman's estimated body weight and physical condition, and most ominously, a series of video recording equipment positioned to document what Strange clearly intends to be Batman's complete psychological breakdown and reconstruction. The Ace chemical plant reveals the true scope of Hugo Strange's 25-year campaign against the Wayne family. This isn't just about revenge for a damaged career or professional jealousy. Strange has constructed an elaborate alternate reality in which he possesses Thomas Wayne's skills, relationships, and social position. The abducted children are casualties in a war being fought entirely within Strange's delusional mind. But the basement laboratory also reveals Strange's fundamental weakness. His obsession with the Wayne family has consumed his entire existence, leaving him completely disconnected from reality outside his elaborate psychological fantasies. He believes his own fabricated evidence about Thomas Wayne's guilt. He genuinely thinks his experimental treatments are helping the children he's traumatized. And most importantly, he's convinced that Batman will be grateful for the psychological cure Strange intends to provide. Batman emerges from the Ace chemical plant with evidence that will expose Strange's crimes and exonerate his father's reputation. But he also carries the knowledge that Strange is preparing for a final confrontation that will determine whether Batman survives as Bruce Wayne or becomes another casualty in Strange's war against the past. The deeper exploration has revealed not just the scope of Strange's crimes, but the psychological landscape of a mind that has spent decades constructing elaborate justifications for unspeakable acts. The real battle won't be fought with fists or gadgets. It will be fought in the realm of memory, identity, and the fundamental question of whether the truth is strong enough to survive someone's determination to rewrite it. The abandoned subway tunnels beneath Gotham stretch like arteries through the city's underground circulatory system, carrying secrets instead of passengers through passages that haven't seen official use since the 1940s. Batman moves through these forgotten pathways with growing understanding of how deeply Hugo Strange's influence has penetrated Gotham's infrastructure over the past quarter century. The tunnel system wasn't randomly chosen for Strange's expanded operations. City planning records recovered from Gotham's municipal archives reveal that Thomas Wayne served on the transportation committee that decommissioned these subway lines in 1978. Wayne personally recommended sealing the tunnels to prevent them from becoming havens for criminal activity, but his murder occurred before the sealing could be completed. Strange exploited this bureaucratic gap to establish a network of underground facilities that connected his various research locations throughout the city. The abandoned subway tunnels provided perfect cover for transporting subjects between the Ace chemical plant, defunct medical facilities, and temporary holding areas, without risking exposure on Gotham's streets. Batman's flashlight illuminates modifications that transform utilitarian transit tunnels into something resembling the underground chambers of a medieval castle. Strange has installed sophisticated ventilation systems that maintain specific temperature and humidity levels throughout the tunnel network. Electrical wiring salvaged from condemned buildings provides power for lighting and electronic equipment. And most significantly, soundproofing materials line the walls to ensure that activities in the tunnels remain completely undetectable from the surface. The tunnels contain evidence of systematic psychological experimentation that spans decades of research. Individual chambers have been carved out of tunnel alcoves, each designed to recreate specific traumatic environments from classic children's literature. A chamber designed like the rabbit hole from Alice in Wonderland, complete with mirrors and distorted proportions that induce psychological disorientation. Another chamber recreates the witch's cottage from Hansel and Gretel, with candy-colored walls that disguise pharmaceutical delivery systems. These literary-themed environments reveal Strange's sophisticated understanding of how childhood psychological conditioning can be exploited through familiar cultural references. Children who have been raised on fairy tales and classic stories possess pre-existing emotional responses to specific symbols and scenarios. Strange weaponized these responses to create therapeutic environments that could manipulate subjects' behavior without their conscious awareness. Batman discovers detailed research notes documenting Strange's study of what he calls cultural programming patterns. The notes describe how exposure to specific stories during early childhood creates neurological pathways that can be triggered later through environmental cues. A child who loved Alice in Wonderland will experience comfort and curiosity when exposed to Tea Party settings, even in threatening situations. This research led Strange to develop what he termed therapeutic narrative environments. Instead of traditional clinical settings, Strange began conducting his experiments within elaborate recreations of beloved children's stories. Subjects would enter these environments believing they were participating in harmless imaginative play, only to discover too late that the familiar stories had been twisted into instruments of psychological control. The subway tunnels contain Strange's most ambitious therapeutic narrative environment, a recreation of Victorian London that spans nearly a quarter-mile of underground passages. Gas lamps provide flickering illumination that casts dancing shadows on brick walls designed to replicate the London of Charles Dickens and Arthur Conan Doyle. Fog machines create the perpetual mist that obscures. Vision and muffles sound throughout the environment. Within this Victorian London environment, Strange has been conducting his most sophisticated psychological experiments. Children are introduced to the setting as participants in elaborate mystery games inspired by Sherlock Holmes stories. They're encouraged to solve puzzles and follow clues while Strange observes their problem-solving, approaches and emotional responses to manufactured suspense, but the mystery games serve darker purposes than entertainment. Strange uses the Holmes framework to teach children that adults who appear threatening might actually be protectors in disguise. The archetypal detective figure, represented by Strange himself in Victorian costume, becomes a trusted authority figure who guides children through increasingly dangerous situations while maintaining their compliance through manufactured intrigue. The Victorian environment also allows Strange to role-play elaborate scenarios in which he embodies various authority figures from classical literature. Medical records found throughout the tunnels document sessions in which Strange presented himself as Dr. Watson, teaching children to trust medical professionals unconditionally. Other sessions involved Strange as Professor Moriarty, demonstrating how children could be manipulated into betraying their own interests while believing they were participating in exciting adventures. Batman examines a section of the tunnel system that Strange has converted into a replica of the Wayne family library, complete with Thomas Wayne's actual books stolen from Wayne Manor after the murders. The library serves as the centerpiece for Strange's most elaborate psychological theater, a setting where he conducts imaginary conversations with Thomas Wayne while children observe from hidden alcoves. These conversations, recorded on audio equipment hidden throughout the library, reveal the depth of Strange's psychological delusion. He genuinely believes that Thomas Wayne's spirit inhabits the replica library and that their ongoing dialogues are helping him understand the true nature of pediatric psychology. Strange asks the imaginary Wayne for advice about treating difficult patients, seeks forgiveness for past professional disagreements, and describes his experimental results as attempts to honor Wayne's therapeutic legacy. The library conversations also reveal Strange's complicated relationship with Bruce Wayne and his vigilante activities. Strange expresses simultaneous admiration and contempt for Batman, describing him as a successful application of trauma-based psychological conditioning who nevertheless represents a flawed understanding of Thomas Wayne's therapeutic principles. According to Strange's recorded monologues, Batman's crime-fighting activities demonstrate that childhood trauma can be channeled into productive adult behavior, but only when guided by proper psychological supervision. Strange believes that Batman's vigilante career has been hampered by his lack of professional therapeutic support, leading to excessive violence and inadequate emotional development. These insights have led Strange to develop what he calls corrective therapy protocols, specifically designed for Batman. The protocols involve exposing Batman to carefully constructed scenarios that recreate the psychological conditions of his parents' murder, but with different outcomes that will supposedly allow him to process his trauma more effectively. The tunnel system contains elaborate staging areas where Strange has been preparing these corrective therapy scenarios. One area recreates Crime Alley with meticulous historical accuracy, including period-appropriate costumes, vintage automobiles, and replica theater marquees. Another area reproduces the Wayne family's private physician's office, complete with medical equipment from the 1970s and copies of Thomas Wayne's patient files. Strange intends to use these environments to provide Batman with alternative versions of his origin story, scenarios in which Thomas Wayne survives the Crime Alley attack and continues his medical career under Strange's mentorship. The psychological impact of experiencing these alternate histories is supposed to eliminate Batman's compulsive need for vigilante activity by providing him with the father-figure relationship he never had the opportunity to develop. But the tunnel system also contains evidence of Strange's growing awareness that his elaborate therapeutic fantasies are failing to produce desired results. Recent research notes document increasing frustration with subjects who fail to respond appropriately to his narrative environments. Strange describes these failures as evidence of corrupted cultural programming that requires more invasive psychological intervention. This frustration has led Strange to develop increasingly aggressive therapeutic techniques, pharmaceutical interventions designed to artificially enhance subjects' emotional responsiveness to narrative cues, surgical procedures intended to modify brain structures associated with skepticism and critical thinking, and most disturbing of all, genetic research aimed at identifying hereditary factors that influence susceptibility to narrative psychological conditioning. The genetic research reveals Strange's ultimate goal, a project he calls therapeutic bloodline development. Strange believes that certain family lines possess genetic markers that make them naturally suited for careers in pediatric psychology and child welfare. The Wayne family represents the most successful example of this genetic predisposition, which explains Thomas Wayne's exceptional ability to connect with traumatized children. Strange's research documents his attempts to identify other families possessing similar genetic markers, with the intention of abducting their children for specialized psychological conditioning. These children would be raised from infancy within Strange's narrative environments, developing into the next generation of therapeutic professionals under his direct supervision. The bloodline research also explains Strange's particular obsession with Bruce Wayne. As Thomas Wayne's son, Bruce possesses the same genetic markers that made his father such an effective pediatrician. Strange believes that with proper therapeutic intervention, Bruce could be transformed from a vigilante into the world's most effective child psychologist, carrying on Thomas Wayne's work under Strange's guidance. Batman realizes that the tunnel system represents more than just Strange's research facility. It's a complete alternate society designed to perpetuate Strange's therapeutic philosophy across multiple generations. The literary-themed environments aren't just experimental settings. They're training grounds for children who will never be allowed to return to the outside world. The ancient echoes resonating through these underground chambers aren't just the sounds of past crimes. They're the voices of children who have been systematically transformed into living embodiments of Strange's psychological theories. Some have been conditioned to believe they are characters from beloved stories, permanently trapped within narrative frameworks that define every aspect of their existence. Others have been modified to serve as perfect patients, eternally dependent on Strange's therapeutic interventions. The tunnel system serves as a monument to the fundamental corruption of everything pediatric psychology should represent. Instead of helping children overcome trauma, Strange has created trauma specifically designed to make children emotionally dependent on their abuser. Instead of encouraging healthy psychological development, he has stunted his subjects' growth to maintain control over their thoughts and behaviors. Batman emerges from the subway, tunnels with evidence that will expose Strange's crimes and rescue the children still trapped within his underground society. But he also carries the knowledge that Strange's influence extends far beyond individual victims. The therapeutic techniques developed through decades of illegal experimentation have been quietly integrated into legitimate psychological practices throughout Gotham's medical community. The ancient echoes of Strange's crimes continue to reverberate through every institution. Thomas Wayne helped establish every program he funded and every life he touched during his medical career. The war between Wayne's humanitarian legacy and Strange's twisted interpretation of therapeutic authority has been fought in shadows for 25 years, with Gotham's most vulnerable children serving as casualties in a conflict they never understood they were part of. The clock tower that serves as Oracle's headquarters overlooks Gotham like a concrete guardian, its Gothic architecture hiding sophisticated computer systems that monitor the city's electronic heartbeat 24 hours a day. Barbara Gordon sits surrounded by banks of monitors displaying data streams that would overwhelm most intelligence agencies. her fingers dancing across multiple keyboards as she processes information flowing in from across the city. Batman's investigation has reached a critical juncture, and Oracle's technological resources represent his best hope of unraveling connections that span decades of carefully concealed criminal activity. The evidence recovered from Hugo Strange's underground facilities has provided pieces of a larger puzzle, but understanding how those pieces fit together requires computational power and database access that exceed even the Batcave's impressive capabilities. I've been running pattern analysis on the disappearance data for the past 72 hours, Oracle says, as Batman reviews the information displayed across her screens. The results confirm your suspicions about institutional infiltration, but the scope is larger than either of us anticipated. The monitors display a complex web of connections linking Strange's activities to legitimate medical institutions throughout Gotham and beyond. Financial records show that Strange maintained consulting relationships with hospitals, research facilities, and psychiatric institutions across the entire northeastern United States. These relationships provided him with access to patient records, research funding, and most importantly, a steady supply of subjects for his experimental programs. Oracle's analysis reveals that Strange didn't operate as a lone predator stalking individual victims. He functioned as the center of a network of compromised medical professionals who knowingly or unknowingly contributed to his research objectives. Some were direct collaborators who shared Strange's interest in experimental psychology. Others were legitimate researchers whose work was secretly funded by grants that Strange controlled through shell corporations and fraudulent foundations. "Look at this," Oracle says, highlighting financial transactions on one of her screens. Strange has been manipulating research funding for over 15 years, directing millions of dollars toward studies that appeared legitimate but were actually designed to support his psychological conditioning experiments. The funding manipulation reveals the true sophistication of Strange's operation. Rather than conducting all his research in isolation, Strange embedded his experimental protocols within legitimate medical studies conducted at respected institutions. University researchers studying childhood trauma unknowingly used therapeutic techniques that Strange had developed through his illegal experimentation. Clinical trials of new psychiatric medications included dosage, protocols that Strange had perfected through pharmaceutical testing on abducted children. This approach allowed Strange to advance his research while maintaining plausible deniability about his methods. If questioned about the effectiveness of specific techniques, he could point to peer-reviewed studies conducted at major universities. If challenged about pharmaceutical protocols, he could cite clinical trials supervised by respected medical professionals. But the network analysis also reveals how Strange used legitimate medical research to identify potential subjects for his more invasive experiments. University studies provided him with detailed psychological profiles of children throughout the region. Clinical trials gave him access to medical records that allowed him to predict which children would be most susceptible to his conditioning techniques. Oracle pulls up a database showing Strange's involvement in over 40 different medical studies conducted between 1980 and 1995. The studies appear unrelated on the surface, covering topics from childhood anxiety disorders to pharmaceutical treatment of attention deficit conditions. But when analyzed as a comprehensive research program, they reveal a systematic investigation into every aspect of child psychology and behavior modification. He's been conducting the largest unauthorized human experimentation program in modern history. Oracle observes, her voice reflecting a mixture of professional admiration and moral revulsion. The scope rivals what the CIA was doing with MK-Ultra, but focused specifically on children and extended over decades instead of years. The comparison to MK-Ultra proves more accurate than Oracle initially realizes. Further database analysis reveals that Strange maintained contact with former CIA researchers who had worked on psychological conditioning programs during the 1960s and 1970s. These researchers provided Strange with classified techniques that had been developed for adult subjects, which Strange then modified for use on children. The CIA connection explains how Strange acquired some of his more sophisticated psychological manipulation techniques. Government-funded research into brainwashing and behavior modification provided him with scientific foundations that would have taken decades to develop independently. By adapting existing methodology for pediatric applications, Strange accelerated his research timeline while ensuring that his techniques would be maximally effective. Oracle's analysis also reveals that Strange's network included medical professionals who had been trained in legitimate therapeutic techniques but were gradually corrupted through exposure to his research methods. These professionals began their careers with genuine desire to help traumatized children, but Strange's influence slowly transformed their therapeutic approaches into tools for psychological control. I've identified at least 12 psychologists and psychiatrists who worked directly with Strange over the past 20 years, Oracle reports, displaying their photographs and professional credentials. All of them started in legitimate pediatric psychology programs, but their treatment methods show clear evolution towards Strange's conditioning techniques. The corrupted professionals represent Strange's most insidious achievement. By gradually modifying established therapeutic practices, he created a generation of mental health workers who unknowingly perpetuated his psychological control methods. Children who received treatment from these professionals experienced subtle forms of the same conditioning that Strange applied more directly to his abducted subjects. This revelation reframes Batman's understanding of Strange's ultimate objectives. The goal wasn't simply to conduct psychological experiments on individual children. Strange was attempting to fundamentally alter pediatric psychology as a medical specialty, transforming it from a healing profession into a system for producing psychologically compliant citizens. Oracle displays case files showing the long-term outcomes for children who received treatment from Strange's corrupted network of professionals. Many developed chronic dependency disorders that required ongoing therapeutic intervention throughout their adult lives. Others experienced personality modifications that made them unusually susceptible to authority figures and resistant to independent thinking. But the most disturbing cases involved children who were specifically conditioned to become the next generation of psychological control agents. These subjects were trained from childhood to pursue careers in psychology, education, and social services, carrying Strange's influence into professions that would give them access to future generations of vulnerable children. Strange wasn't just experimenting on children, Batman realizes. He was breeding them to perpetuate his psychological control systems indefinitely. The breeding program represents Strange's most ambitious and horrific achievement. By identifying children with specific genetic and psychological characteristics, then conditioning them through years of specialized treatment, Strange created individuals who would naturally gravitate toward careers that involved influencing children's psychological development. Oracle's analysis reveals that several of Strange's specially conditioned subjects have already achieved positions of significant influence within Gotham's educational and social service systems. School psychologists, social workers, and child protective services personnel who received Strange's conditioning during their own childhoods are now implementing his techniques on new generations of children. The contamination is systemic, Oracle concludes. Strange's influence has been integrated into the fundamental structure of how Gotham treats childhood psychological trauma. Removing his direct influence won't eliminate the conditioning techniques that are now embedded in legitimate institutional practices. The revelation explains why Strange has been so confident about his ultimate victory over the Wayne family legacy. Even if his direct operations are exposed and shut down, the psychological control systems he's established will continue operating through legitimate professional channels. Thomas Wayne's humanitarian efforts to help traumatized children have been systematically corrupted into mechanisms for perpetuating the very trauma they were designed to heal. Batman studies Oracle's analysis with growing understanding of the true scope of the challenge he faces. Stopping Strange personally won't be enough to eliminate his influence. The network of corrupted professionals, contaminated institutions, and conditioned subjects represents a multi-generational conspiracy that has become self-perpetuating. But Oracle's technological analysis also reveals Strange's fundamental weakness. His network depends on maintaining secrecy about the true nature of his psychological techniques. If the corrupted professionals realized they were implementing behavior control methods instead of legitimate therapy, many would refuse to continue. If the conditioned subjects understood how their own psychological development had been manipulated, they might be able to break free from their programming. We need to expose the entire network simultaneously, Batman concludes. If Strange realizes we're moving against him, he'll activate contingency plans that could destroy evidence and eliminate witnesses before we can build a comprehensive case. Oracle begins developing a coordinated exposure strategy that will reveal Strange's crimes while protecting his victims and dismantling his network of corrupted professionals. The plan requires precise timing and extensive coordination with law enforcement agencies that haven't been compromised by Strange's influence. But as Batman prepares for the final phase of his investigation, Oracle's analysis reveals one more crucial piece of information. Strange hasn't just been implementing his psychological control systems through corrupted medical professionals. He's been using them to monitor Bruce Wayne's psychological development since childhood, studying Batman's methods and motivations in preparation for their ultimate confrontation. Strange knows you're coming for him, Oracle warns. He's been preparing for this confrontation for over 20 years, using his network to study your psychological patterns and develop countermeasures specifically designed to exploit your emotional vulnerabilities. The final battle won't just be between Batman and Hugo Strange. It will be between Bruce Wayne's authentic desire to protect children and Strange's corrupted version of that same protective instinct. Strange believes he can demonstrate that Batman's vigilante activities represent a flawed application of psychological conditioning, and that proper therapeutic intervention can transform Batman into a more effective agent of Strange's vision for psychological control. The significant revelation has transformed Batman's investigation from a quest to solve historical crimes into a race to prevent the permanent corruption of everything Thomas Wayne represented. The battle for Gotham's future will be fought not in the streets, but in the realm of memory, identity, and the fundamental question of whether healing can triumph over control in the treatment of childhood trauma. The Wayne Manor Library stands exactly as it did the night Thomas and Martha Wayne were murdered, preserved by Alfred's meticulous care as a shrine to lost possibilities. Moonlight streams through tall windows, illuminating leather-bound medical journals and family photographs that capture moments of happiness that feel impossibly distant now. Bruce Wayne sits in his father's chair, surrounded by documents that have transformed his understanding of everything he thought he knew about his family's legacy. The revelation discovered in Oracle's database analysis has led Bruce to examine his father's personal papers with fresh eyes, searching for connections he missed during previous investigations. Hidden compartments in Thomas Wayne's desk have yielded correspondence that was never meant to be found. Letters exchanged with medical colleagues who shared his growing concerns about unauthorized psychological experimentation being conducted on children throughout Gotham. My dear colleague, reads one letter dated February 1979, written in Thomas Wayne's precise handwriting. Your warnings about Dr. Strange's research methodology have proven more accurate than either of us feared. I have documented evidence that children treated in his pilot programs are exhibiting signs of induced psychological dependency that persist long after treatment concludes. These are not therapeutic outcomes. They represent systematic conditioning designed to create permanent patient relationships. The correspondence reveals that Thomas Wayne had been building a case against Hugo Strange for over a year before his murder, working with a network of medical professionals who had observed disturbing patterns in Strange's research results. But these professionals were operating within a medical community that Strange had been systematically infiltrating since the early 1970s, using grants and research partnerships to place his allies in positions of institutional authority. Bruce discovers financial records showing that Strange had been manipulating Wayne Foundation funding to support his research objectives while simultaneously gathering intelligence about Thomas Wayne's investigation. Every grant proposal Thomas approved, every medical program he funded, every institutional partnership he endorsed was being monitored by Strange's network and used to anticipate Wayne's next moves. The surveillance extended beyond professional activities into the Wayne family's personal life. Strange had been conducting psychological profiles of Bruce Wayne since childhood, studying his emotional development and behavioral patterns to understand how Thomas Wayne's parenting techniques might be replicated or improved through scientific intervention. The subject displays remarkable resilience to traumatic stimuli, reads one of Strange's psychological assessments of 8-year-old Bruce Wayne, dated just months before the Wayne murders. Preliminary analysis suggests that Thomas Wayne has implemented sophisticated emotional conditioning techniques that allow the child to process fear and anxiety through constructive channels. Further study of the Wayne family dynamic could provide valuable insights for therapeutic applications. Strange's interest in Bruce Wayne wasn't academic curiosity. It was reconnaissance for a psychological experiment that would span decades. Strange had been planning to eliminate Thomas Wayne and assume control of Bruce's psychological development, believing he could improve upon Thomas Wayne's parenting methods through the application of his experimental conditioning techniques. The Wayne murders weren't random street crime or even revenge for Thomas Wayne's medical career. They were the opening move in Strange's most ambitious psychological experiment, designed to create the perfect subject for studying how childhood trauma could be channeled into productive adult behavior. Under proper therapeutic guidance, Bruce examines crime scene photographs from his parents' murder with new understanding of their significance. The killer's positioning, the timing of the attack, even the location in Crime Alley were all carefully chosen to maximize the psychological impact on 8-year-old Bruce Wayne. Strange had orchestrated every detail to create specific traumatic conditions that would shape Bruce's psychological development according to Strange's experimental protocols. The traumatic event must occur in an environment associated with safety and family bonding. Strange had written in research notes predating the murders by 6 months. The subject's psychological conditioning will be most effective if the trauma contradicts existing assumptions about parental protection and environmental security. The Wayne family's attendance at the opera, their decision to leave through the theater's rear exit, even their route through Crime Alley had been influenced by suggestions planted through Strange's network of compromised associates. The killer knew exactly when and where the Wayne family would be vulnerable because Strange had spent months engineering the circumstances that would place them in that location at that time. But Strange's manipulation extended beyond orchestrating the murders. He had also influenced the investigation that followed, ensuring that the crime would be classified as random street violence rather than targeted assassination. Key evidence was suppressed or misdirected. Witnesses were intimidated or discredited, and investigating officers were reassigned before they could develop leads that might expose Strange's involvement. The cover-up succeeded so completely that even Commissioner Gordon never suspected the Wayne murders were anything other than tragic coincidence. Strange's network within Gotham's law enforcement community ensured that the investigation would reach conclusions that supported Strange's experimental objectives while eliminating any possibility of connecting the murders to his research activities. Bruce discovers that Strange had been monitoring his psychological development throughout his childhood and adolescence, using data gathered through compromised school counselors, family physicians, and even domestic staff who had been unknowingly recruited as intelligence sources. Every aspect of Bruce's emotional growth was documented and analyzed to determine whether Strange's experimental predictions about trauma-based conditioning were proving accurate. Subject continues to channel traumatic energy into physical conditioning and intellectual development, reads one of Strange's progress. Reports from Bruce's teenage years. Psychological assessment suggests that the experimental parameters are producing desired results. Subject shows no signs of destructive behavior patterns typically associated with childhood trauma. Instead, trauma appears to be motivating enhanced focus on personal improvement and justice-oriented thinking. Strange's satisfaction with these results led him to begin developing the next phase of his experiment, a series of interventions designed to guide Bruce Wayne's trauma-driven development toward specific career objectives. Strange wanted to determine whether traumatic conditioning could be used to create individuals with enhanced capabilities in areas that served his research interests. The revelation explains the mysterious circumstances surrounding Bruce's decision to leave Gotham for extensive training around the world during his early 20s. The martial arts masters, detective mentors, and psychological instructors who shaped Bruce's development into Batman weren't randomly encountered. Many were connected to Strange's network of research associates, individuals who had been studying trauma-based conditioning techniques and were eager to test their methods on a subject with Bruce's psychological profile. The subject's international training regimen has exceeded all experimental projections. Strange wrote in a research summary dated during Bruce's absence from Gotham. Trauma-based psychological conditioning has successfully produced enhanced physical capabilities, superior analytical thinking, and remarkable emotional discipline. These results suggest that controlled childhood trauma can serve as a foundation for developing exceptional adult capabilities when properly guided through subsequent training phases. Strange viewed Bruce Wayne's transformation into Batman not as an unexpected development, but as validation of his experimental methodology. The vigilante activities represented proof that childhood trauma could be weaponized to create individuals with capabilities far exceeding normal human parameters, provided the trauma was precisely calibrated and the subsequent conditioning was properly supervised. But Strange's experiments with Bruce Wayne revealed a fundamental flaw in his psychological theories. The trauma-based conditioning that created Batman also produced an individual with the analytical capabilities and emotional resilience necessary to eventually uncover Strange's role in orchestrating the original trauma. Strange had created his own nemesis through the very experiments designed to prove his theories about psychological control. This realization led Strange to develop increasingly desperate measures to maintain control over his experimental subject. The revival of the Dollmaker murders, the manipulation of child disappearances to echo patterns from the 1970s, even the elaborate underground facilities were all designed to force Batman into psychological situations that would demonstrate Strange's superior understanding of trauma-based conditioning. Bruce examines the final section of his father's hidden correspondence, letters that reveal Thomas Wayne's growing awareness that someone was manipulating his family's circumstances to create specific psychological pressures. Thomas had begun to suspect that Bruce's behavioral development was being influenced by external factors, but he was killed before he could identify the source of that influence. "I fear that our son is being studied," Thomas Wayne had written to Martha in his final letter, found hidden in a medical journal. His responses to various situations are too precisely calibrated, his emotional development too consistent with theoretical models I have read in psychological literature. Someone has been observing our family and possibly influencing circumstances to create specific developmental outcomes. The letter reveals that Thomas Wayne had been planning to remove his family from Gotham permanently, relocating to a location where they would be beyond Strange's surveillance and manipulation. The opera attendance that led to their murder was intended to be their final public appearance in Gotham before disappearing into protective anonymity. Strange discovered Thomas Wayne's escape plan through his network of surveillance assets and realized that his most important experimental subject was about to be removed from his control. The decision to eliminate Thomas and Martha Wayne while preserving Bruce wasn't motivated by revenge or professional jealousy. It was a calculated research decision designed to maintain access to his experimental subject while eliminating the parental influences that might interfere with his conditioning protocols. The hidden truth that emerges from decades of buried evidence is more horrific than random tragedy or even targeted revenge. Bruce Wayne's entire life has been an experiment conducted by a madman who believed childhood trauma could be scientifically harnessed to create superior human beings. Every loss Bruce has experienced, every challenge he has overcome, every skill he has developed has been observed and analyzed by the man responsible for creating the trauma that shaped his existence. Strange's ultimate goal wasn't to destroy the Wayne family legacy or prove his superiority over Thomas Wayne's medical achievements. Strange wanted to demonstrate that human psychological development could be scientifically controlled from childhood through adulthood, creating individuals whose capabilities exceeded normal human parameters while remaining psychologically dependent on their conditioning source. The revelation reframes Batman's war on crime as something far more complex than simple vigilante justice. Bruce Wayne has been unknowingly fighting against a psychological control system that was designed to shape his development from childhood, using methods and motivations that were implanted through trauma-based conditioning rather than emerging from authentic personal choice. But the hidden truth also reveals the source of Batman's greatest strength. The analytical capabilities and emotional resilience that allowed Bruce to uncover Strange's manipulation weren't products of the conditioning. They were authentic human qualities that survived and transcended the experimental protocols designed to control them. Strange's experiments succeeded in creating Batman, but they failed to create the psychological dependency that would have made Batman controllable. The final confrontation with Hugo Strange won't just determine the fate of Gotham's missing children or the exposure of decades of illegal experimentation. It will determine whether Bruce Wayne's identity as Batman represents authentic heroism emerging from tragedy, or simply the successful implementation of trauma-based psychological conditioning designed to serve a madman's research objectives. Alfred Pennyworth stands in the Wayne Manor study, his weathered hands steady as he pours Earl Grey tea into china cups that have served the Wayne family for 3 generations. The familiar ritual provides a moment of normalcy in what has become the most challenging investigation of his long service to the family. Across from him, Commissioner Gordon removes his glasses and massages tired eyes that have seen too much evidence of human cruelty over the past week. 73 years I've lived in this city, Alfred says quietly, his voice carrying the weight of accumulated wisdom. I've seen Gotham survive the Great Depression, world wars, economic collapse, and more criminal enterprises than any city should endure. But nothing has prepared me for the scope of what Dr. Strange has accomplished. Gordon accepts his tea with grateful hands, finding comfort in the warmth that spreads through the porcelain. The past week has transformed his understanding of law enforcement in Gotham, revealing how deeply corruption can penetrate institutional structures when guided by scientific methodology and unlimited patience. Strange didn't just commit crimes, Gordon observes, his voice reflecting decades of professional experience with Gotham's criminal element. He created an entire shadow system that mimicked legitimate medical and law enforcement procedures. Half my department has been unknowingly implementing protocols that Strange developed through illegal experimentation. The revelation has shaken Gordon's faith in institutional authority more profoundly than decades of dealing with traditional corruption. Political graft and criminal influence are comprehensible problems that can be addressed through conventional law enforcement methods. But Strange's systematic manipulation of professional training and therapeutic techniques represents a form of corruption that attacks the fundamental principles underlying civilized society. Oracle enters the study carrying printed analysis reports that represent weeks of computational investigation into Strange's network of influence. Her expression reflects the exhaustion of someone who has spent too much time documenting evidence of systematic child abuse conducted under the guise of medical research. "I've completed the network analysis," she announces, distributing copies of her findings to Alfred and Gordon. Strange's influence extends through 47 different institutions across the northeastern United States: universities, hospitals, research foundations, government agencies, even charitable organizations that focus on child welfare. The scope of Strange's influence explains how he maintained his operations for over 25 years without detection. By spreading his activities across multiple institutions and geographical regions, Strange created a research network that appeared legitimate when examined from any single perspective. Only comprehensive analysis using advanced computational resources could reveal the connections linking apparently unrelated medical studies and therapeutic programs. Alfred examines Oracle's findings with the methodical attention to detail that has made him invaluable to the Wayne family for over 50 years. Dr. Strange didn't simply conduct unauthorized research, he observes. He systematically corrupted the entire field of pediatric psychology, transforming therapeutic techniques designed to heal children into methods for controlling them. The corruption wasn't limited to individual professionals or isolated research programs. Strange had influenced the development of training curricula used in major universities, ensuring that new generations of psychologists and psychiatrists would be educated in techniques that incorporated his conditioning methodology. Professional certification programs included assessment criteria that reflected Strange's theoretical frameworks rather than established therapeutic principles. Gordon studies financial records showing how Strange funded this systematic corruption through an intricate network of grants, research contracts, and consulting fees. He invested over $50 million across 3 decades, Gordon calculates, his law enforcement background allowing him to appreciate the scale of the operation. This wasn't the work of an individual criminal. This was institutional transformation conducted through legitimate channels. The financial analysis reveals that Strange had been operating with resources that exceeded those available to most government agencies. His funding sources included pharmaceutical companies interested in his research results, private foundations established by wealthy individuals who shared his interest in psychological control techniques, and even foreign governments seeking to understand American approaches to behavior modification. But Strange's most significant resource wasn't financial. It was time. Unlike traditional criminals who operate under constant threat of detection and arrest, Strange had the luxury of implementing his plans across multiple decades. This temporal advantage allowed him to embed his influence so deeply within legitimate institutions that removing it would require dismantling and rebuilding fundamental aspects of how society treats childhood. Psychological trauma. Alfred refills the tea cups with practiced efficiency, using the familiar domestic ritual to provide emotional anchor points for conversations that threaten to overwhelm human comprehension. Master Bruce has always possessed remarkable resilience, he reflects, but learning that his entire life has been shaped by Dr. Strange's experimentation would challenge anyone's sense of identity and purpose. The key psychological impact on Bruce Wayne represents Strange's most cruel achievement. By orchestrating the trauma that created Batman while simultaneously documenting Batman's development as experimental validation, Strange has contaminated Bruce's heroic identity with questions about authenticity and free will that may never be fully resolved. Oracle displays psychiatric evaluation reports on her laptop, documents that reveal how Strange's conditioning techniques affected other subjects who didn't possess Bruce Wayne's unusual psychological resilience. Most of Strange's subjects developed permanent dependency disorders, she explains. They became incapable of forming authentic relationships or making independent decisions. Strange essentially turned them into biological robots programmed to respond to his psychological triggers. The evaluation reports describe human beings whose personalities had been so thoroughly reconstructed through conditioning that they could no longer function as independent individuals. Some subjects could only communicate through responses learned during therapeutic sessions. Others had lost the ability to experience emotions outside the narrow parameters established by their conditioning protocols. But the reports also reveal subjects who had been specifically conditioned to become the next generation of psychological control agents. These individuals had been trained from childhood to pursue careers in psychology, education, and social services while maintaining unconscious loyalty to Strange's theoretical frameworks. They genuinely believed they were helping children while implementing techniques designed to perpetuate psychological dependency. Strange created a self-perpetuating system, Gordon realizes, his law enforcement experience helping him understand the implications. Even if we arrest him and shut down his direct operations, the professionals he trained will continue, implementing his methods because they believe those methods represent legitimate therapeutic techniques. The self-perpetuating nature of Strange's influence represents the most challenging aspect of dismantling his network. Traditional law enforcement approaches focus on arresting criminals and prosecuting crimes, but Strange's methodology has integrated his criminal objectives into legitimate professional practices that are protected by academic freedom and medical confidentiality. Alfred considers the implications of Strange's systematic corruption with the long-term perspective that comes from serving multiple generations of the Wayne family. Dr. Strange has attacked the fundamental trust relationship between medical professionals and vulnerable children, he observes. The damage extends far beyond his direct victims to encompass society's entire approach to pediatric mental health care. The broader social implications explain why Strange viewed his work as historically significant rather than simply criminal. He believed he was conducting research that would revolutionize human psychological development, creating more effective methods for shaping children into adults who possessed enhanced capabilities while remaining socially compliant. Oracle pulls up research papers published by Strange's network of associates, documents that reveal how his experimental findings were being integrated into mainstream psychological literature. Strange's techniques are being taught in universities as innovative therapeutic approaches, she reports. Students who learn these methods don't know they're implementing behavior control protocols developed through illegal experimentation. The academic integration of Strange's research methodology represents his most sophisticated achievement. By publishing his findings through legitimate research channels while concealing the illegal methods used to obtain his data, Strange ensured that his influence would continue expanding even if his direct operations were exposed. Gordon examines correspondence between Strange and pharmaceutical companies that had been funding his research in exchange for access to his experimental data. The medication protocols being used to treat childhood trauma disorders are based on Strange's illegal human experimentation, he realizes. Children throughout the country are being prescribed drugs that were developed by testing on abducted subjects. The pharmaceutical connections reveal another layer of Strange's influence that extends far beyond Gotham's boundaries. Major drug companies had been incorporating Strange's research results into their product development processes, creating medications specifically designed to enhance psychological conditioning rather than treat underlying medical conditions. Alfred reflects on the contrast between Thomas Wayne's humanitarian approach to pediatric medicine and Strange's systematic exploitation of the same field for psychological control purposes. Master Thomas dedicated his career to empowering children to overcome trauma and develop their full potential, he says. Dr. Strange has spent his career learning how to weaponize that same trauma to create psychological dependency. The philosophical opposition between Thomas Wayne's therapeutic philosophy and Strange's conditioning methodology explains the personal nature of Strange's campaign against the Wayne family. Strange didn't just disagree with Thomas Wayne's medical approaches. He viewed Wayne's success with traumatized children as validation of therapeutic principles that contradicted Strange's belief in the necessity of psychological control. Oracle displays timeline analysis showing how Strange's activities accelerated after Thomas Wayne's murder, suggesting that eliminating Wayne had removed the primary professional obstacle to Strange's research expansion. Strange viewed Thomas Wayne as the leading advocate for therapeutic approaches that empowered patients rather than controlling them, she explains. Eliminating Wayne cleared the way for Strange to reshape pediatric psychology, according to his own theories. The murder of Thomas and Martha Wayne represents more than elimination of investigative threats or revenge for professional humiliation. It was the opening move in Strange's campaign to fundamentally alter society's approach to childhood psychological development, replacing empowerment-based therapy with control-based conditioning. As the evening progresses, the three individuals gather in Wayne Manor's study recognize that they are facing an enemy whose influence extends far beyond traditional criminal enterprises. Strange has created institutional structures that will continue operating even after his personal defeat, spreading his psychological control techniques through legitimate professional channels that are resistant to conventional law enforcement intervention. The wisdom they gather from analyzing Strange's methodology reveals that defeating him will require more than arresting a criminal. It will require rebuilding fundamental trust between medical professionals and the children they serve, while simultaneously exposing decades of systematic corruption that has infected the core principles of pediatric psychology. The final confrontation with Strange won't just determine the fate of his current victims or the exposure of his historical crimes. It will determine whether society can preserve therapeutic approaches that empower children to overcome trauma, or whether Strange's vision of psychological control will continue spreading through the legitimate medical institutions he has systematically corrupted. The autumn wind howls through Gotham's concrete canyons with unusual ferocity tonight, as if the city itself senses that secrets buried for decades are finally clawing their way toward the surface. In the depths of Arkham Asylum, emergency lighting casts dancing shadows down corridors that have witnessed more human suffering than any building should contain. The power grid fluctuations that have plagued the facility for weeks have intensified, creating an atmosphere of technological uncertainty that mirrors the psychological instability of the institution's most dangerous residents. Dr. Sarah Chen, Arkham's chief of psychiatric services, walks through the high-security wing with growing unease. For 3 weeks, she has been reviewing patient files and treatment records as part of Batman's investigation into Hugo Strange's network of influence. What she has discovered challenges everything she believed about professional psychiatric practice and forces her to confront the possibility that her entire career has been built upon corrupted foundations. The treatment protocols we've been using for childhood trauma cases aren't based on legitimate research, she explains to Batman, her voice echoing strangely in the empty corridor. The pharmaceutical dosages, the therapeutic techniques, even the patient assessment criteria, all trace back to studies conducted or influenced by Dr. Strange's research network. Batman follows Dr. Chen through security checkpoints that grant access to Arkham's most restricted areas, where the asylum's most dangerous patients are housed under conditions that blur the line between medical treatment and imprisonment. The institutional architecture seems designed to induce psychological pressure rather than promote healing, with narrow corridors, harsh lighting, and constant surveillance creating an environment of perpetual anxiety. Strange didn't just infiltrate psychiatric institutions, Batman observes, studying architectural details that suggest decades of systematic modification. He helped design them. These environments are constructed to reinforce psychological dependency rather than encourage recovery. The revelation explains why Arkham Asylum has such poor success rates in treating patients and such high recidivism among those who are supposedly cured. The facility wasn't designed according to therapeutic principles that promote mental health. It was constructed using Strange's research into environmental factors that enhance psychological conditioning and maintain long-term behavioral control. Dr. Chen leads Batman to a section of Arkham that has been sealed since the early 1980s, ostensibly due to structural problems that made the area unsafe for patient housing. But the architectural analysis reveals that these areas were actually specialized research facilities where Strange conducted his most invasive psychological experiments during his official employment at the asylum. We found surgical equipment hidden behind false walls, Dr. Chen reports, unlocking a door that reveals a room designed like an operating theater. Brain imaging devices that were never approved for clinical use, pharmaceutical storage areas containing compounds that aren't licensed for human treatment. Strange was conducting experimental neurosurgery on patients without their knowledge or consent. The hidden surgical facilities reveal the true scope of Strange's research activities during his legitimate medical career. While publicly conducting conventional psychiatric treatments, Strange was simultaneously performing experimental procedures designed to test his theories about surgical modification of brain structures associated with trust, dependency, and emotional attachment. Batman examines surgical logs that document hundreds of unauthorized procedures conducted on Arkham patients between 1978 and 1985. The procedures involve precise modifications to brain regions, controlling emotional regulation, memory formation, and social bonding. Patients who underwent these modifications showed dramatic changes in personality and behavior that Strange documented as evident, supporting his theories about neurological basis of psychological conditioning. The patients who received these procedures lost their ability to form normal human relationships, Dr. Chen explains, reviewing medical charts that chronicle the devastating long-term effects. They became completely dependent on institutional authority figures for basic decision-making. Strange essentially turned them into biological machines, programmed to respond to specific psychological triggers. The surgical modifications explain why certain Arkham patients never recover despite years of treatment, and why others seem to improve only to relapse when exposed to specific environmental cues. Strange had been using the asylum's patient population as experimental subjects for testing surgical techniques that could reliably produce psychological dependency in adult subjects. But the hidden research facilities also reveal that Strange's surgical experimentation wasn't limited to modifying existing patients. He had been performing procedures on children who were brought to Arkham under false psychiatric diagnoses, subjecting them to brain modifications that would shape their psychological development. According to his experimental protocols, these files document over 300 children who were admitted to Arkham between 1979 and 1984 for supposedly severe behavioral disorders, Dr. Chen says, displaying medical records that show obvious signs of falsification. Most were released after short stays with their behavioral problems mysteriously resolved, but the surgical logs show that all underwent brain modification procedures during their time here. The revelation that Strange used Arkham as a base for conducting experimental surgery on children represents his most horrific crime. Under the cover of treating behavioral disorders, Strange had been systematically modifying children's brains to enhance their susceptibility to psychological conditioning while suppressing their capacity for independent thought and emotional autonomy. Batman studies patient photographs from Strange's surgical experiments, images that show children before and after their procedures. The before photographs reveal normal children displaying typical emotional range and behavioral spontaneity. The after photographs show the same children with vacant expressions and mechanical responses that suggest their personalities had been fundamentally altered. Strange documented his surgical techniques in research. Papers that were published in international medical journals, Dr. Chen reveals, showing academic publications that describe Strange's procedures as breakthrough treatments for severe childhood psychiatric disorders. Universities around the world have been teaching these techniques as legitimate therapeutic interventions. The international dissemination of Strange's surgical techniques explains how his influence extended far beyond Gotham's boundaries. Medical schools in dozens of countries have been training psychiatrists and neurosurgeons to perform procedures that were developed through illegal experimentation on children, spreading Strange's methods throughout the global medical community. But the research papers also reveal Strange's ultimate goal, which went beyond individual patient treatment to encompass fundamental modification of human psychological development. Strange believed that surgical intervention during childhood could reliably produce adults with enhanced cognitive capabilities while maintaining psychological compliance with authority structures. Strange wasn't trying to cure mental illness, Batman realizes, studying research protocols that describe systematic approaches to personality modification. He was trying to engineer human psychological evolution according to his own theoretical frameworks. The evolutionary engineering represents Strange's most grandiose ambition, a project that viewed individual children as experimental subjects in a multi-generational effort to create human beings whose psychological characteristics could be scientifically controlled from birth through adulthood. Strange believed his research would ultimately allow society to eliminate psychological disorders while ensuring that all individuals remain socially compliant and institutionally dependent. Dr. Chen leads Batman to Strange's private office within the sealed section of Arkham, a space that has been preserved exactly as Strange left it when he disappeared. From legitimate medical practice in 1985, the office contains detailed plans for psychological engineering projects that would have affected millions of children if implemented on a societal scale. Strange developed protocols for mass psychological screening of school-age children, Dr. Chen explains, reviewing documents that outline systematic approaches to identifying subjects suitable for conditioning experiments. He wanted to establish mandatory psychological evaluation programs that would allow him to select children for specialized treatment designed to modify their personality development. The mass screening protocols represent Strange's vision for transforming society through systematic psychological intervention. Rather than limiting his research to individual subjects, Strange had been planning to implement his conditioning techniques through educational and social service systems that would give him access to entire generations of children. Batman examines correspondence between Strange and government officials who had expressed interest in his research results. The letters reveal that Strange had been developing relationships with policymakers who could authorize implementation of his mass screening programs through legitimate governmental channels. Strange convinced certain officials that his techniques could eliminate juvenile crime and reduce social disorder, Dr. Chen reports, showing letters from politicians who praised Strange's research as potentially revolutionary for public safety. They were prepared to fund large-scale implementation of his psychological conditioning programs. The government interest in Strange's research explains how he obtained funding and institutional support for projects that exceeded the resources available to individual medical researchers. Strange had been positioning his experimental techniques as solutions to social problems that concerned law enforcement and political leaders, gaining their support for programs that would have given him unprecedented access to vulnerable children. But the correspondence also reveals that Strange's government contacts were unaware of his illegal research methods. They believed his techniques had been developed through legitimate clinical studies rather than unauthorized experimentation on abducted subjects. Strange had successfully concealed his criminal activities while promoting the results of those activities as breakthrough medical discoveries. The shadow of truth that Strange has cast over pediatric psychology extends into government policy and educational planning, Batman observes, studying documents that show how deeply Strange's influence had penetrated institutional decision-making processes. Exposing his crimes won't just require arresting him, it will require dismantling policy frameworks that are based on his illegal research. The institutional penetration represents Strange's most enduring achievement and his greatest vulnerability. By embedding his research results into legitimate governmental and educational policies, Strange created systems that would perpetuate his influence even after his direct involvement ended. But those same systems provide documentary evidence of his activities that can be used to expose the illegal methods underlying his supposedly legitimate discoveries. As Batman and Dr. Chen conclude their investigation of Arkham's hidden research facilities, the psychological weight of their discoveries settles over them like a shroud. Strange hasn't just committed individual crimes against specific victims. He has systematically corrupted the fundamental principles underlying society's approach to childhood psychological development, transforming therapeutic institutions designed to heal trauma into mechanisms for perpetuating psychological control. The shadow of truth that emerges from decades of buried evidence reveals that Strange's influence extends into every aspect of how modern society treats children who have experienced psychological trauma. Educational policies, medical protocols, even legal frameworks for child protection have been shaped by research that was conducted through illegal experimentation on abducted subjects. The final confrontation with Strange will determine whether that shadow can be lifted, allowing authentic therapeutic approaches to emerge from the corruption that has infected pediatric psychology for over 25 years. But it will also determine whether society can confront the uncomfortable truth that many of its most cherished institutions have been built upon foundations of systematic child abuse disguised as medical research. The abandoned Gotham Children's Hospital rises from the fog like a concrete monument to broken promises, its empty windows staring blindly across the city that once trusted it to heal its most vulnerable inhabitants. Batman stands on the building's rooftop, studying architectural blueprints that reveal modifications made to the structure during Hugo Strange's tenure as chief of pediatric psychology in the late 1970s. The modifications aren't visible from the exterior, but they have transformed the building's interior into something far more sinister than a medical facility. 25 years of investigation have led to this moment, to this building where Thomas Wayne once worked to heal traumatized children and where Hugo Strange corrupted that noble mission into something unspeakable. The hospital was officially closed in 1982 due to budget constraints, but city records show that Strange maintained access to the facility through a complex web of shell corporations and fraudulent maintenance contracts. Batman descends through a skylight into the hospital's main corridor, where his flashlight illuminates walls still decorated with cheerful murals intended to comfort frightened children. But the innocuous decorations cannot disguise the institutional modifications that Strange implemented during his final years of legitimate medical practice. Hidden cameras monitor every room. Concealed speakers allow audio surveillance and psychological manipulation. And beneath the building's foundation, an extensive underground complex serves purposes that have nothing to do with pediatric medicine. The elevator that once carried sick children to treatment floors now descends to basement, levels that don't appear on any official architectural plan. Strange has spent decades expanding the hospital's underground areas, creating a subterranean complex that rivals the size of the building above ground. These hidden levels serve as the operational headquarters for Strange's psychological research network, the nerve center from which he has coordinated 25 years of systematic child experimentation. The first basement level contains Strange's administrative offices, where computer systems maintain detailed files on thousands of subjects who have been processed through his conditioning programs over the past quarter century. The files reveal the true scope of Strange's operations, documenting not just the children who were abducted for direct experimentation, but also those who were modified through his network of corrupted medical professionals working within legitimate institutions. Batman examines subject files that chronicle the psychological development of children from birth through adulthood, showing how Strange's conditioning techniques shaped their educational choices, career decisions, and even personal relationships. Some subjects were guided into careers that would give them access to future generations of children, perpetuating Strange's influence through legitimate professional channels. Others were conditioned to become psychological control agents who could implement Strange's techniques without understanding their true purpose. But among the thousands of subject files, one folder stands apart from the rest, distinguished by its thickness and the meticulous detail of its documentation. The folder bears a simple label written in Strange's precise handwriting. Subject Alpha, Bruce Wayne, Primary Experimental Protocol. The contents of Bruce Wayne's file reveal the horrifying truth about Batman's origin story. Strange had been monitoring the Wayne family since Bruce's birth, studying Thomas Wayne's parenting techniques and documenting Bruce's psychological development with scientific precision. Every milestone in Bruce's childhood was recorded, analyzed, and compared to Strange's theoretical models for trauma-based conditioning. Subject displays exceptional resilience to standard conditioning protocols, reads one of Strange's early assessments. Parental influences appear to have created psychological frameworks that resist external manipulation, recommend elimination of parental variables to test subject's adaptability, controlled traumatic conditioning. The clinical language cannot disguise the monstrous calculation behind Strange's decision to orchestrate the Wayne murders. Bruce Wayne wasn't a random victim of street crime. He was Strange's most important experimental subject, a child whose psychological development had been monitored from birth, and whose traumatic conditioning was precisely calibrated to produce specific developmental outcomes. Strange's documentation reveals that he had been planning the Wayne murders for over 2 years, studying the family's routines and identifying optimal circumstances for creating maximum psychological impact while maintaining plausible deniability about the crime's true nature. The killer who gunned down Thomas and Martha Wayne was operating according to detailed instructions designed to ensure that 8-year-old Bruce would experience trauma that met Strange's experimental specifications. Traumatic. Events successfully implemented according to protocol parameters. Strange wrote in his assessment following the murders, subject responded to parental elimination with enhanced focus and emotional discipline rather than psychological breakdown. Initial results suggest that controlled childhood trauma can indeed serve as foundation for exceptional adult development when properly managed. The revelation that his parents' murder was orchestrated as part of a psychological experiment strikes Batman with devastating force. Everything he has believed about his origin story, his motivation for becoming a vigilante, even his commitment to protecting Gotham's children, has been shaped by a madman's scientific curiosity about trauma-based conditioning. But Strange's documentation also reveals that his experiment with Bruce Wayne didn't end with the murders. Throughout Bruce's childhood and adolescence, Strange had been manipulating circumstances to provide additional traumatic experiences designed to reinforce the psychological conditioning established by his parents' death. School bullying incidents, academic challenges, even social rejection were orchestrated through Strange's network to test Bruce's resilience and guide his psychological development. Subject continues to channel traumatic energy into constructive outlets. Strange noted during Bruce's teenage years, physical conditioning, intellectual development, and justice-oriented thinking patterns suggest successful implementation of experimental protocols. Subject appears to be developing enhanced capabilities consistent with theoretical projections for trauma-based conditioning. Strange viewed Bruce Wayne's transformation into Batman not as an unexpected development, but as validation of his theories about the potential benefits of controlled childhood trauma. The vigilante activities proved that properly managed psychological conditioning could create individuals with capabilities far exceeding normal human parameters. Batman descends to the second basement level, where Strange has constructed what can only be described as a shrine to his greatest experimental achievement. The entire floor is devoted to monitoring Batman's activities, with computer systems that track crime-fighting patterns, analyze tactical decisions, and document psychological responses to various threat scenarios. Wall-mounted screens display real-time surveillance footage from across Gotham, showing Batman's current location and activities. Strange has been watching every move Batman makes, studying his methods and documenting his psychological state with the same clinical detachment he applied to other experimental subjects. Subject has successfully integrated traumatic conditioning into functional adult identity, reads Strange's most recent assessment. Enhanced physical capabilities, superior analytical thinking, and remarkable emotional discipline demonstrate successful application of childhood trauma as developmental tool. Results exceed all theoretical projections and validate fundamental assumptions underlying experimental methodology. But the surveillance system also reveals Strange's growing concern about his experimental subjects' increasing independence. Batman's investigation into the historical child disappearances has demonstrated analytical capabilities that threaten to expose Strange's role in orchestrating the Wayne murders. The subject has become too successful, developing investigative skills that could ultimately identify his own conditioning source. Subject's analytical development has reached critical threshold, Strange notes in recent entries. Continued investigation threatens exposure of experimental protocols. Recommend implementation of corrective intervention to maintain experimental control and prevent subject from achieving complete psychological independence. The corrective intervention protocols outline Strange's plan for the final phase of his experiment with Bruce Wayne. Rather than allowing Batman to continue operating with increasing independence, Strange intends to reveal the truth about the Wayne murders and Bruce's subsequent conditioning, believing that this revelation will create psychological dependency that will make Batman controllable. Batman discovers that Strange has prepared an elaborate presentation designed to demonstrate his superior understanding of Bruce's psychological development. The presentation includes detailed documentation of every traumatic experience Strange orchestrated, every challenge he engineered, and every success he guided throughout Bruce's transformation into Batman. Subject will be forced to confront the reality that his entire identity has been shaped by external manipulation, Strange explains in his protocol notes. This revelation will eliminate subject's sense of autonomous agency and create dependency relationship with conditioning source. Subject will recognize superior therapeutic authority and submit to ongoing psychological supervision. Strange genuinely believes that exposing his manipulation will make Batman grateful for the guidance that shaped his development into an exceptional individual. The presentation is designed not to destroy Batman psychologically, but to recruit him as a willing participant in Strange's vision for trauma-based human enhancement. The third basement level contains Strange's most elaborate creation, a perfect replica of Crime Alley as it existed on the night of the Wayne murders. Every detail has been recreated with obsessive accuracy, from the theater posters on nearby walls to the specific lighting conditions that existed that night. Strange has been using this environment to role-play alternative versions of the Wayne murders, experimenting with different scenarios to determine optimal approaches for psychological conditioning. But the replica Crime Alley serves another purpose. Strange intends to bring Batman to this environment for the final revelation about his experimental manipulation. The psychological impact of learning the truth about his parents' murder while standing in the exact location where it occurred is designed to create maximum emotional vulnerability and psychological dependency. Environmental conditioning will enhance subjects' receptivity to therapeutic intervention. Strange notes in his presentation protocols. Combination of traumatic location, shocking revelation, and demonstration of superior psychological knowledge will create optimal conditions for establishing permanent therapeutic relationship. Strange has spent 25 years building toward this moment, when he will finally reveal himself as the architect of Batman's origin story and the guiding force behind his development into Gotham's greatest detective. The revelation is intended not as a confession of criminal activity, but as proof of Strange's superior understanding of human psychological development. Batman examines the final component of Strange's presentation, a comprehensive psychological profile that outlines his plan for Bruce Wayne's future development. Rather than ending the experiment, Strange intends to guide Batman into a new phase of conditioning designed to enhance his capabilities while ensuring his continued dependence on Strange's therapeutic supervision. Subject possesses optimal psychological characteristics for advanced experimental protocols. Strange concludes in his analysis, successful completion of current conditioning phase qualifies subject for enhancement procedures that will maximize his potential while ensuring continued experimental utility. The enhancement procedures involve pharmaceutical interventions and surgical modifications designed to augment Batman's already exceptional capabilities, while implanting psychological controls that will prevent him from operating independently of Strange's guidance. Strange believes he can create the perfect crime-fighting tool, an individual with superhuman capabilities who remains completely obedient to his conditioning source. As Batman concludes his examination of Strange's underground complex, he realizes that the final confrontation will involve more than exposing crimes or rescuing victims. Strange has created an alternative reality in which Batman's heroic identity represents nothing more than successful implementation of trauma-based conditioning, and where continued heroism requires submission to ongoing psychological manipulation. The climactic revelation has transformed Batman's understanding of his own identity and purpose. The question is no longer whether he can defeat Hugo Strange, but whether he can preserve his sense of authentic heroism while confronting the possibility that everything he believes about himself might be the product of scientific manipulation rather than genuine moral choice. The confrontation takes place in the replica crime alley that Strange has constructed 3 levels beneath Gotham Children's Hospital, where theatrical lighting recreates the exact conditions that existed on the night Thomas and Martha Wayne were murdered. Hugo Strange stands in the precise location where the gunman waited 27 years ago, wearing a white medical coat over his slight frame, his pale hands steady as he adjusts recording equipment that will document what he believes will be his greatest therapeutic triumph. "Welcome home, Bruce," Strange says with the gentle voice he once used to comfort frightened children in legitimate medical settings. "I've been waiting a very long time for this conversation. 27 years to be precise, since the night I gave you the gift of purposeful existence." Batman emerges from the shadows of the replica alley, his cape flowing behind him like liquid darkness. The familiar environment triggers automatic psychological responses conditioned by decades of trauma, but his analytical mind processes the subtle differences that reveal this crime alley as an elaborate stage set rather than the authentic location where his parents died. "You orchestrated their murder," Batman states, his voice carrying the controlled rage that has driven him through a decade of crime fighting. "Thomas and Martha Wayne died because you wanted to study how childhood trauma could be weaponized to create enhanced human capabilities." Strange activates his recording equipment with obvious satisfaction, documenting what he views as the successful conclusion of his longest-running psychological experiment. "I provided you with optimal developmental conditions," he corrects, his clinical detachment unchanged despite the magnitude of his confessions. "Your parents were preventing you from reaching your full potential through conventional nurturing approaches that suppress natural aggressive instincts." The conversation unfolds according to Strange's carefully planned therapeutic protocol, designed to demonstrate his superior understanding of Bruce Wayne's psychological development while establishing the dependency relationship that will make Batman controllable. Strange genuinely believes he is providing therapeutic benefit by revealing the scientific foundations underlying Batman's heroic identity. Every challenge you faced after their deaths was precisely calibrated to enhance your physical and intellectual development. Strange explains, consulting notes that document decades of psychological manipulation, the bullying incidents that taught you to fight, the academic pressures that sharpened your analytical thinking, the social isolation that focused your energy on crime prevention rather than normal adolescent distractions. Batman listens to Strange's revelations with growing understanding of the scope of manipulation that has shaped his entire existence. But rather than experiencing the psychological breakdown that Strange expects, Batman feels a strange sense of liberation as the artificial constraints of his conditioned responses begin to dissolve. You studied my father's parenting techniques and decided you could improve them through scientific application of controlled trauma, Batman observes, his detective instincts analyzing Strange's methodology even while processing the personal implications. But you made a fundamental error in your experimental design. Strange pauses in his presentation, confusion flickering across his features as Batman's response deviates from his predicted psychological profile. The experimental subject is supposed to experience overwhelming gratitude for the therapeutic guidance that transformed him into an exceptional individual, not analytical criticism of experimental methodology. Thomas Wayne's approach to pediatric psychology was based on empowering children to overcome trauma through developing their own internal resilience. Batman continues, his voice gaining strength as he articulates insights that transcend Strange's conditioning. Your approach creates dependency by ensuring that subjects never develop authentic self-reliance. The observation strikes at the core weakness in Strange's psychological theories. By maintaining control over his experimental subjects' developmental conditions, Strange prevented them from developing the genuine emotional autonomy that would allow them to transcend their traumatic conditioning. His subjects remained dependent on external validation because they were never allowed to discover their own internal sources of strength. You created Batman through systematic manipulation. Batman acknowledges accepting the truth about his artificial origin while rejecting its implications for his future choices. But Batman's commitment to protecting children isn't the result of your conditioning. It's what remains of Thomas Wayne's authentic values after your attempts to corrupt them. Strange attempts to regain control of the therapeutic session by revealing additional evidence of his manipulation, showing Batman detailed documentation of every traumatic experience he orchestrated throughout Bruce's childhood and adolescence. But each revelation only strengthens Batman's understanding of how authentic human resilience can survive even the most sophisticated attempts at psychological control. Your experimental protocols succeeded in creating enhanced physical and intellectual capabilities, Batman admits, studying Strange's documentation with professional appreciation for its thoroughness. But they failed to eliminate the authentic moral principles that my parents instilled before you murdered them. The realization that his greatest experimental success has also been his most complete failure sends Strange into psychological crisis. His theoretical frameworks cannot accommodate subjects who transcend their conditioning while retaining the enhanced capabilities that conditioning was designed to produce. Batman represents an evolutionary development that Strange's scientific models cannot explain or control. 27 years of careful psychological guidance, Strange protests, his clinical detachment cracking under the pressure of experimental failure. Every traumatic experience precisely calculated to maximize your developmental potential. You owe your exceptional capabilities to my therapeutic intervention. Batman approaches Strange with the calm confidence of someone who has finally understood the true source of his strength. You're right that trauma shaped my development, but the capabilities that make me effective aren't the result of your conditioning. They emerge from the authentic values that survived your attempts to destroy them. The distinction between artificially enhanced capabilities and authentic moral development represents the fundamental flaw in Strange's experimental methodology. By focusing on creating enhanced individuals through trauma-based conditioning, Strange failed to understand that genuine heroism requires moral authenticity that cannot be scientifically engineered. The children you abducted and conditioned became dependent on external authority because you never allowed them to develop internal moral frameworks, Batman explains, his detective instincts analyzing the broader implications of Strange's research methodology. Your techniques create compliance, not genuine moral development. Strange realizes that his most important experimental subject has achieved psychological independence despite decades of conditioning designed to prevent exactly that outcome. The therapeutic relationship he intended to establish has been rejected by a subject who understands the difference between authentic moral choice and scientifically manipulated behavior. Batman activates a communication device that signals Commissioner Gordon and FBI agents who have been waiting for evidence to justify massive arrests throughout Strange's network of corrupted institutions. The documentation Strange has provided during his therapeutic presentation will serve as evidence for prosecuting not just Strange personally, but the entire infrastructure of professionals who have been unknowingly implementing his conditioning techniques. Your research will be invaluable for identifying and deprogramming the conditioning protocols you embedded in legitimate medical institutions, Batman informs Strange, whose expression shifts from therapeutic confidence to dawning horror as he realizes the implications. The children you harmed will finally receive authentic therapeutic help designed to restore their psychological autonomy. The systematic exposure of Strange's network begins immediately as law enforcement. Agencies coordinate simultaneous arrests across 47 institutions in 12 states. University professors who taught conditioning techniques disguised as innovative therapy find themselves facing criminal charges for unknowing participation in illegal human experimentation. Pharmaceutical companies that funded Strange's research discover that their products were developed through systematic child abuse. But the most important aspect of the resolution involves the children who survived Strange's conditioning programs. Batman has worked with legitimate child psychologists to develop deprogramming techniques that can help Strange's victims reclaim their psychological autonomy without losing the enhanced capabilities that some developed during their traumatic experiences. The goal isn't to eliminate every effect of Strange's conditioning, Batman explains to Dr. Sarah Chen, who will supervise the therapeutic recovery program. Some subjects develop genuine capabilities that they can retain while learning to make authentic moral choices about how to use those capabilities. The deprogramming process represents a new approach to treating trauma-based conditioning that acknowledges the complex relationship between enhanced development and psychological manipulation. Rather than attempting to eliminate all effects of traumatic conditioning, the therapy focuses on helping subjects distinguish between artificially implanted responses and authentic personal values. Strange's arrest occurs without resistance, as the doctor appears psychologically shattered by the failure of his most important experiment. His certainty about the superiority of trauma-based conditioning has been undermined by Batman's demonstration that authentic moral development can transcend even the most sophisticated psychological manipulation. You were my greatest success, Strange says as federal agents prepare to transport him to a maximum security psychiatric facility. Everything exceptional about you emerged from the traumatic conditioning I provided. Without my intervention, you would have remained an ordinary child living an unremarkable life. Batman considers Strange's final attempt to claim credit for his heroic development. You're partially correct. The trauma you inflicted did shape my capabilities. But the moral principles that guide how I use those capabilities came from my parents, not from your conditioning. That's why your experiment ultimately failed. The resolution extends beyond Strange's personal defeat to encompass fundamental changes in how society approaches childhood trauma and psychological development. The evidence of systematic corruption in pediatric psychology leads to comprehensive reforms in professional training, institutional oversight, and research methodology that will prevent future exploitation of vulnerable children. Universities revise their psychology curricula to eliminate techniques derived from Strange's illegal research. Pharmaceutical companies recall medications that were developed through unauthorized human experimentation. Government agencies implement new safeguards to prevent infiltration by researchers who prioritize scientific advancement over ethical treatment of human subjects. But the most significant aspect of the resolution involves Batman's evolved understanding of his own identity and purpose. By accepting the artificial aspects of his origin while preserving the authentic moral principles that survived his conditioning, Batman achieves psychological integration that transcends the limitations Strange intended to impose. Hugo Strange created enhanced capabilities through trauma-based conditioning. Batman reflects during his final conversation with Alfred in Wayne Manor's study. But Thomas Wayne provided the moral framework that determines how those capabilities are used. Strange's experiment succeeded technically, while failing completely in its ultimate purpose. The resolution reveals that authentic heroism cannot be scientifically engineered because it requires moral authenticity that emerges from genuine personal choice rather than psychological manipulation. Strange's attempt to create the perfect crime-fighting tool failed because tools lack the moral autonomy necessary for genuine heroic action. Batman's investigation has exposed one of the most sophisticated criminal conspiracies in modern history while providing insights into the relationship between trauma development and moral choice that will influence therapeutic approaches for generations. The resolution preserves the enhanced capabilities that emerge from traumatic conditioning while ensuring that those capabilities serve authentic moral purposes rather than the psychological control objectives that Strange intended. 6 months after Hugo Strange's arrest, Gotham Children's Hospital has been transformed from a monument to psychological manipulation into a beacon of authentic therapeutic practice. The building's underground levels, once housing Strange's experimental facilities, have been converted into treatment centers specifically designed for deprogramming the conditioning protocols that affected thousands of children over the past quarter-century. Dr. Sarah Chen oversees the recovery programs with methodical dedication, working 18-hour days to coordinate treatment approaches that address the complex psychological damage caused by Strange's systematic conditioning. The challenge extends far beyond traditional therapy because Strange's subjects require assistance distinguishing between artificially implanted responses and authentic personal development that occurred despite their traumatic experiences. We're essentially teaching people to rediscover their own authentic personalities. Dr. Chen explains to a gathering of international medical professionals who have come to study Gotham's innovative approach to deprogramming psychological conditioning. Strange's techniques were so sophisticated that many subjects can't tell the difference between conditioned responses and genuine emotional reactions. The deprogramming process involves careful analysis of each subject's psychological development, identifying specific conditioning protocols while preserving genuine capabilities and positive traits that emerge during their recovery from trauma. Some subjects possess enhanced analytical thinking or emotional resilience that represents authentic growth rather than artificial conditioning, and the therapy aims to maintain these strengths while eliminating dependency responses. Barbara Gordon, operating now primarily as Oracle rather than maintaining her previous field activities, coordinates the technological aspects of the recovery programs. Her computer systems track progress for over 3,000 individuals who were directly or indirectly affected by Strange's research network, monitoring their psychological development and identifying subjects who may require additional therapeutic intervention. The scope of Strange's influence was even larger than we initially realized. Oracle reports during weekly coordination meetings with law enforcement agencies throughout the region. University databases show that his conditioning techniques were taught to psychology students, who are now practicing professionals in 43 states and 17 countries. The international scope of Strange's influence has required unprecedented cooperation between governmental agencies, medical institutions, and law enforcement organizations. The evidence recovered from Strange's facilities has been shared with authorities worldwide, leading to investigations that have exposed similar psychological manipulation programs in multiple countries. Commissioner Gordon finds himself coordinating the largest criminal investigation in Gotham's history, working with federal agencies to prosecute not just Strange personally, but the entire network of professionals who unknowingly implemented his conditioning techniques. The legal challenges are unprecedented because most of the network participants believed they were conducting legitimate medical research and therapy. We're dealing with a new category of criminal conspiracy. Gordon explains to district attorneys who are developing prosecution strategies for cases involving unknowing participation in systematic child abuse. Most of the professionals in Strange's network genuinely believed they were helping children. Determining criminal liability requires establishing when ignorance of illegal methodology comes willful negligence. The legal proceedings have revealed fundamental weaknesses in professional oversight systems that allowed Strange to operate undetected for over 25 years. Medical licensing boards, university research committees, and pharmaceutical regulatory agencies all failed to identify obvious signs of systematic abuse because Strange's methodology was sufficiently sophisticated to mimic legitimate research practices. Alfred Pennyworth spends his days coordinating Wayne Foundation efforts to support the recovery programs, ensuring that families affected by Strange's crimes receive comprehensive assistance without the bureaucratic obstacles that often complicate therapeutic intervention. His decades of experience managing Wayne family resources prove invaluable for organizing support systems that address practical as well as psychological needs. Master Bruce has asked me to ensure that every child harmed by Strange's research receives the same level of care and support that the Wayne family would provide for their own. Alfred explains to Foundation staff members who are developing long-term assistance programs. This means not just immediate therapy, but educational support, career guidance, and lifetime access to medical care if needed. The Wayne Foundation's involvement represents more than charitable obligation. Bruce Wayne views the recovery programs as an opportunity to honor his father's authentic commitment to child welfare while demonstrating that trauma-based conditioning can be overcome through therapeutic approaches that empower rather than control. Many of Strange's former subjects find themselves grappling with questions of identity and authenticity that have no simple answers. Their enhanced capabilities are real and valuable, but they emerge from experiences that involved systematic abuse and psychological manipulation. The therapy focuses on helping them integrate these capabilities into authentic personal identities rather than rejecting everything that resulted from their traumatic experiences. I can analyze complex problems and think strategically in ways that most people can't, explains Maria Santos, now 23 years old and one of Strange's earliest subjects. The question isn't whether these abilities are real, but whether I can use them for purposes that reflect my own values rather than his conditioning. Maria's case represents the complexity of recovery from sophisticated psychological conditioning. Her analytical capabilities exceed those of most adults and provide significant advantages in her chosen career as a social worker specializing in child protection. But she struggles with questions about whether her career choice reflects authentic personal interest or conditioning, designed to perpetuate Strange's influence. Recovery programs have developed innovative therapeutic approaches that address these identity questions without attempting to eliminate all effects of traumatic conditioning. The goal is helping subjects distinguish between conditioned responses that serve Strange's objectives and genuine personal development that emerged from their own resilience and moral choice. Some of Strange's subjects choose to use their enhanced capabilities in careers that directly oppose his psychological control methodology. Several have become advocates for children's rights, researchers studying ethical approaches to trauma therapy, or law enforcement professionals specializing in crimes against children. Their first-hand understanding of psychological manipulation makes them uniquely effective in protecting other children from similar exploitation. Strange intended to create a generation of psychological control agents, observes Dr. Chen during a presentation to the American Psychological Association. Instead, many of his subjects have become the most effective advocates for protecting children from systematic abuse. Their enhanced capabilities are being used to ensure that crimes like Strange's can never be repeated. The therapeutic outcomes vary significantly among Strange's subjects, reflecting differences in their individual resilience, the specific conditioning they receive, and the support systems available during their recovery. Some achieve complete psychological independence while retaining enhanced capabilities. Others require ongoing therapeutic support to maintain stability while developing authentic personal relationships. But even the subjects who struggle most with recovery demonstrate remarkable strength in their commitment to preventing other children from experiencing similar abuse. Their participation in the recovery programs provides valuable insights for developing therapeutic approaches that can address psychological conditioning more effectively than traditional trauma therapy. Batman continues his patrol activities with renewed understanding of his own psychological development and its relationship to his crime-fighting effectiveness. The revelation that his capabilities emerged from artificial conditioning hasn't diminished his commitment to protecting Gotham's children, but it has enhanced his ability to recognize and counter psychological manipulation techniques used by other criminals. Strange's conditioning gave me enhanced analytical capabilities and emotional discipline. Batman reflects during one of his regular conversations with Alfred, but the moral principles that guide how I use those capabilities came from Thomas Wayne's authentic values, not from Strange's manipulation. The distinction between enhanced capabilities and moral authenticity has become central to Batman's evolved approach to crime fighting. He uses his artificially enhanced abilities to serve authentic moral purposes, demonstrating that traumatic conditioning can be transcended through genuine commitment to protecting others rather than controlling. And then the aftermath of Strange's exposure has also led to fundamental changes in how Gotham's criminal justice system approaches cases involving childhood trauma and psychological conditioning. Police officers, social workers, and court personnel receive specialized training in recognizing signs of systematic psychological abuse and responding with therapeutic approaches rather than purely punitive measures. We're learning that many criminals who seemed inherently evil were actually victims of psychological conditioning similar to what Strange practiced. Commissioner Gordon observes during a conference on innovative approaches to criminal justice. This doesn't excuse their crimes, but it suggests that rehabilitation focused on deprogramming conditioning might be more effective than traditional punishment. The broader implications of Strange's research extend into fundamental questions about human moral development, the relationship between trauma and resilience, and the possibility of creating enhanced human capabilities through ethical rather than exploitative methods. Universities worldwide are establishing research programs that explore these questions while maintaining strict ethical standards to prevent future exploitation. 6 months after the resolution of the case, the aftermath continues expanding as the full scope of Strange's influence becomes apparent. But the recovery programs have demonstrated that even the most sophisticated psychological conditioning can be overcome through therapeutic approaches that respect human dignity and support authentic moral development. The aftermath reveals that healing from systematic abuse requires more than individual therapy. It requires transformation of the institutional systems that allowed the abuse to occur. combined with sustained commitment to supporting survivors while preventing similar crimes against future generations of children. 2 years have passed since Hugo Strange's final arrest, and Gotham City awakens to a dawn that feels different from those that came before. The industrial haze that perpetually shrouded the skyline has begun to lift, not through environmental changes, but through something more fundamental, a shift in the city's collective psychological atmosphere that reflects the healing taking place in institutions throughout the metropolitan area. From his position on the cathedral spire of Old Gotham Church, Batman watches the sun rise over a city that has learned to confront its deepest secrets and emerge stronger from the confrontation. The Gothic architecture that once seemed to embody Gotham's darkness now appears majestic in the golden morning light, its stone gargoyles transformed from menacing guardians into protective sentinels watching over the children sleeping safely in their beds below. The recovery programs have exceeded all therapeutic expectations, with over 80% of Strange's identified subjects achieving significant psychological independence while retaining the enhanced capabilities that emerged from their traumatic experiences. The success rate reflects not just innovative treatment approaches, but the remarkable resilience of human beings who refuse to allow systematic abuse to define their futures. Dr. Sarah Chen has become internationally recognized for developing therapeutic protocols that address complex psychological conditioning without attempting to eliminate all effects of traumatic experiences. Her work has influenced treatment approaches for survivors of systematic abuse worldwide, demonstrating that healing requires integration rather than elimination of difficult experiences. We've learned that authentic recovery means helping people distinguish between conditioned responses that serve their abusers' objectives and genuine capabilities that represent their own strength and resilience. Dr. Chen explains during her final report to the Wayne Foundation board, the goal isn't to return subjects to their pre-trauma state, but to help them develop authentic identities that incorporate both their suffering and their strength. The therapeutic philosophy emerging from Gotham's recovery programs has revolutionized approaches to childhood trauma, treatment throughout the medical community. Rather than viewing trauma as purely destructive, the new approaches recognize that extreme experiences can sometimes produce genuine capabilities and insights that become valuable when integrated into healthy psychological frameworks. Maria Santos exemplifies the successful integration of enhanced capabilities with authentic moral development. Now 25 years old, she directs a non-profit organization that specializes in identifying and dismantling psychological conditioning programs before they can harm children. Her analytical abilities, originally developed through Strange's conditioning, have been redirected toward protecting other children from similar exploitation. Strange taught me to think strategically and analyze complex psychological patterns. Maria reflects during a conference presentation to international child protection agencies. But I choose to use those abilities to ensure that no other children experience what we went through. The capabilities are real, but the purposes I serve are my own. The distinction between enhanced capabilities and authentic moral choice has become central to understanding how individuals can transcend systematic conditioning while retaining valuable skills that emerge from their traumatic experiences. The recovery programs focus on empowering subjects to make conscious decisions about how to use their abilities rather than attempting to eliminate those abilities entirely. Oracle continues coordinating technological support for recovery programs while expanding her monitoring systems to identify potential psychological conditioning operations before they can establish themselves. Her databases now track patterns of institutional behavior that might indicate systematic abuse, providing early warning systems that could prevent future exploitation of vulnerable children. We've developed algorithmic approaches that can identify the subtle signs of psychological conditioning programs within legitimate institutions, Oracle reports during quarterly briefings with federal agencies responsible for child protection. The goal is detecting these operations during their early stages rather than waiting decades for victims to come forward. The technological monitoring systems represent one component of comprehensive institutional reforms designed to prevent future exploitation of children through systematic psychological conditioning. Universities have implemented new oversight protocols for research involving human subjects. Medical licensing boards have established enhanced screening procedures for professionals working with traumatized children, and government agencies have created specialized units trained to investigate crimes involving sophisticated psychological manipulation. Commissioner Gordon finds himself overseeing a police department that has been fundamentally transformed by the insights gained through investigating Strange's network. Officers receive specialized training in recognizing signs of psychological conditioning and responding with therapeutic, rather than purely punitive, approaches to both victims and perpetrators. We've learned that many criminals are themselves victims of systematic conditioning designed to create antisocial behavior. Gordon explains during his testimony before a congressional committee studying criminal justice reform. This doesn't excuse their crimes, but it suggests that rehabilitation focused on deprogramming, conditioning might be more effective than traditional punishment. For certain categories of offenders, the criminal justice reforms emerging from Gotham's experience with Strange's network have influenced policy discussions throughout the country. The recognition that criminal behavior can sometimes result from systematic psychological conditioning rather than inherent moral failure has led to innovative approaches that combine accountability with therapeutic intervention. Alfred Pennyworth spends his final years coordinating Wayne Foundation programs that support not just Strange's direct victims, but children throughout the region who have experienced various forms of systematic abuse. His decades of experience managing complex family dynamics prove invaluable for developing support systems that address both immediate therapeutic needs and long-term developmental goals. Master Thomas would be proud to see how his commitment to helping traumatized children has inspired programs that protect thousands of young people. Alfred reflects during one of his evening conversations with Bruce in Wayne Manor's study. Strange attempted to corrupt that legacy, but ultimately his crimes have led to more comprehensive child protection than my master ever imagined possible. The Wayne Foundation's expansion of child protection programs represents Thomas Wayne's authentic vision finally achieving the scope and effectiveness that Hugo Strange's manipulation had prevented. The Foundation now operates therapeutic centers throughout the northeastern United States, providing specialized treatment for children who have experienced systematic psychological abuse while supporting research into ethical approaches to trauma recovery. Bruce Wayne has integrated his understanding of his own artificial conditioning into a more sophisticated approach to crime, fighting that focuses on identifying and dismantling systematic exploitation rather than simply responding to individual criminal acts. His enhanced analytical capabilities, originally developed through Strange's conditioning, now serve to protect other children from experiencing similar manipulation. Strange's experiment succeeded in creating enhanced capabilities through trauma-based conditioning. Bruce acknowledges during a rare interview with a journalist investigating the long-term effects of the case. But those capabilities only become meaningful when they serve authentic moral purposes rather than the psychological control objectives that Strange intended. Batman's evolved approach to vigilante activities demonstrates that enhanced human capabilities can serve genuine heroic purposes when guided by authentic moral principles rather than artificial conditioning. His crime-fighting effectiveness has actually increased since discovering the artificial aspects of his origin, because he now operates from conscious moral choice rather than conditioned response. The city's transformation extends beyond individual recovery to encompass fundamental changes in how Gotham's institutions approach childhood development and trauma treatment. Schools have implemented new educational approaches that build psychological resilience without creating dependency relationship. Social service agencies have developed family support programs that strengthen authentic parenting relationships, rather than replacing them with institutional authority. But perhaps the most significant transformation involves Gotham's collective understanding of the relationship between trauma and resilience. The city has learned that extreme experiences don't inevitably produce either victims or perpetrators, but can sometimes create individuals with enhanced capabilities to protect others from similar suffering. As the sun climbs higher over Gotham's skyline, Batman concludes his patrol and returns to Wayne Manor, where Alfred has prepared breakfast in the sunlit kitchen that overlooks gardens where Martha Wayne once grew flowers for the children's ward at Gotham Hospital. The domestic tranquility provides a counterpoint to the darkness that has defined much of Bruce's life, demonstrating that healing creates space for simple pleasures as well as complex moral achievements. The peaceful conclusion of Strange's case doesn't represent the end of Batman's crime-fighting activities, but rather their evolution into a more sophisticated understanding of how systematic evil operates and how it can be effectively opposed. The investigation has revealed that protecting children requires more than responding to individual crimes. It requires transforming the institutional systems that can be corrupted to facilitate systematic abuse. The recovery programs continue operating with reduced intensity as most of Strange's subjects achieve stable psychological independence. Some choose to remain involved as peer counselors, helping newer subjects navigate their own recovery processes. Others pursue careers that utilize their enhanced capabilities for protecting children or advancing ethical approaches to trauma treatment. The ongoing success of the recovery programs has attracted international attention from governments and organizations dealing with similar cases of systematic psychological conditioning. Gotham's therapeutic approaches are being adapted for use with survivors of various forms of institutional abuse, from military psychological operations to religious cult conditioning. As Batman removes his cape and cowl in the privacy of the Batcave, Bruce Wayne reflects on the journey that led from his parents' murder through Strange's revelation to this moment of hard-won understanding. The cave that once served primarily as a shrine to trauma and vengeance has evolved into a center for protecting children through sophisticated analysis of systematic threats rather than simple reactive crime fighting. The peaceful conclusion reveals that authentic heroism emerges not from perfect origins but from conscious choices to use whatever capabilities one possesses in service of protecting others. Strange's attempt to create the perfect crime-fighting tool failed because tools lack the moral autonomy necessary for genuine, heroic action. But his failure produced something more valuable than he intended. Bruce Wayne has become not just Batman, but an individual who understands how enhanced capabilities can serve authentic moral purposes when guided by conscious choice rather than psychological conditioning. The distinction makes him more effective as both a crime fighter and a human being, demonstrating that healing from systematic abuse can produce strength that transcends the original trauma. The sun now shines fully over Gotham City, illuminating a metropolis that has learned to confront its darkest secrets and emerge stronger from the confrontation. Children wake in homes where they are protected not just by locks and alarms, but by institutional systems that have been fundamentally reformed to prevent the kind of systematic exploitation that Strange practiced for decades. In the distance, church bells chime the hour, their bronze voices carrying across the city like a benediction for those who have survived systematic abuse and those who work to protect others from similar suffering. The sound echoes through streets where children will walk safely to schools staffed by professionals, trained to recognize and prevent psychological conditioning rather than unknowingly perpetuate it. The peaceful conclusion of this investigation into Gotham's darkest mysteries doesn't promise that evil will never again threaten the city's children, but it demonstrates that systematic evil can be identified, exposed, and dismantled by individuals who choose to use their capabilities in service of authentic moral principles rather than psychological control. As the final echoes of the church bells fade into the morning air, Gotham settles into the rhythm of another day, another opportunity for its citizens to choose protection over exploitation, healing over conditioning, and authentic moral development over systematic psychological control. The city sleeps more peacefully now, knowing that its children are watched over not just by a vigilante in a cape, but by institutional systems designed to recognize and prevent the kind of sophisticated evil that once threatened to corrupt everything good about childhood itself. And in that peaceful sleep, there are no nightmares of tea parties in basements or dollhouses where children disappear. There are only dreams of futures where enhanced capabilities serve authentic purposes, where trauma leads to genuine strength, and where the shadows that once hid systematic evil now shelter those who choose to protect rather than exploit the innocent.